right, here we go. We are going to order the Town Council meeting number 8-23 here in Council Chambers on Tuesday, April 25th, 2023. And here with us tonight, we have Councilor Pillsbury.
Present.
Councilor Fournier.
Here.
Councilor Daniele.
Here.
Councilor Bradley.
Here.
Our Vice Chair, Councilor Egan.
Here.
And the Chair, Dan Pilch, is here. Councilor Lawrence is excused tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I should note that we also have with us our interim town manager, Caroline Pelletier, for her first council meeting as manager. So welcome. We'll be kind.
No fooling around, look at it.
All right.
I'm ready. Bring it.
We'll see. First up, our second order of business is to waive the reading of the minutes from our last meeting, 07-23, held on April 4th, and to accept the minutes as printed.
So, second.
Thank you, Councilor Bradley and Councilor Daniele for the second. Any discussion or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes as printed?
Aye.
Everybody, thank you, gentlemen. Next up is announcements. I have just one. It is regarding burn permits. This is open burning season. The fire department is seeing a seasonal increase in burning permits issued during the spring season. With the increase of permits comes the increase of calls for checking on open burnings. These calls are typically due to smoke traveling in the neighborhood or the pile appears as a large fire. To burn, you must have a permit in hand from the Maine Forest Service, which can be obtained from the following website, maine.gov/burn permit. Burn permits will be issued after 9 a.m., depending on the determined fire class day set by the Forest Service. And we have some tips for a successful open burn, which are: 1, keep your burn piles small; 2, have hand tools handy as well as a water source; 3, be mindful of smoke direction and potential increase of the wind speed and direction; and lastly, for more information on open burning, visit the Maine Forest Service website. Be safe. Did I miss anything, Chief? Covers it. Any other announcements? Next up is our information exchange, which is our time for councilors to exchange information with each other. Councilor Bradley, I see a finger raised.
Thank you. In the last minutes, I announced that there was a sort of informal meeting between residents along the harbor and a member of the airboat community to talk about ways in which the two might get together to affect compromise and noise reductions that would take us out of the regulatory regime for that at the state level. I want to report that we held a meeting. The results were, I guess, disappointing to me. What happened was the group representing the residents announced that they really wanted to look at all of their options as opposed to their option to work with the one person who had come forward and I had identified. So that person and I said to them, do as you please. I mean, it's your world. And we declined to participate further in the discussions until something positive. So it was sort of a disappointing meeting. I'm sure it was disappointing for them as well as for us. But it, I think, was the right way to let them go forward without tying up a member of our harvesting community in a process that neither he nor I understood.
Councilor Daniele.
So the Rue Institute partners with communities to put on events that they call Start Summits. These events are intended to get participants thinking about entrepreneurship and to tackle a theme that the host municipality solves. So that I wanted to let everybody know that there is a group in Freeport kind of actively working to host one of these events. There's nothing official yet, but if people are interested and want to learn more, they can feel free to reach out to me. they're a stakeholder or just interested. So for instance, Rockland tackled the blue economy, Skowhegan did one about outdoor economy. So just giving you guys the heads up that something might be in the works, and hopefully I'll have more concrete announcement later.
Awesome. Sounds encouraging. Anybody else? Councilor Egan.
This morning, actually, I got a chance to sit with Caroline, acting manager, and Judy Hawley, our deputy manager, with officials from Amtrak who are doing outreach to service communities, particularly in Maine and the Downeaster corridor, to, one, just introduce themselves and provide a base and a referral source and some information. At least I learned a lot about sort of the difference between the rail operator and the railroad operator, and what NEPRA does, New England Public Rail Authority, in terms of managing various information bits and customer information. So it was curious to see that that Amtrak, who runs the railroad, doesn't actually own anything right here in Freeport. They don't even own the platform. So when we have conversations about what we can do with the train, we just have to, at least I have to clarify who we're actually talking about, that the railroad operator is not the same one as the owner of the tracks and is not the same one as the administrator of the site. So those are three different entities. So if we have conversations about what the rail may or may not do, such as future, soon-to-be, in front of us, conversations about a transit-oriented development plan, of which the train would be a part, we just have to make sure we've got our right constituents there. But it was very informative, very nice people to work with, and they're extremely interested to engage with us in communication as they go about their business of running Amtrak. So, and then secondly, I just wanted to advise that the Housing Committee has been active and busy with combing through the land use ordinance and other planning board documents for some suggested recommendations for promoting downtown activity and simplifying things. And so the planning board has a relatively light, if not wide open agenda in May. And so a couple of the Housing Committee members, one of whom was on the planning board, will be present at that meeting to make some recommendations, which we'll eventually hear about up here. That's it.
Anybody else? I just have a scheduling note, more of a reminder. We meet again next Tuesday, so we have a meeting a week from now. And then we're off the following Tuesday, back for May 16th. And then the week after May 16th, we have another back-to-back meeting. On the 23rd, we have a meeting which is a workshop with FEDC, where we'll probably get into some more downtown vision updates as well at that meeting. So meeting next week, then we're off, and then 2 meetings in a row. That's all we got for information exchange, which brings us to our town manager's report.
All right, my
Ms.
first
Peltier,
one.
good luck.
It's short. So, true sign of spring, we've had some questions. Public Works will be installing the North Main Street parklet. They choose to follow the same outdoor seating rules that we have in place for our private properties. So May 1, you'll see the North Street parklet go up in that block near DeRogers and Sherman's and the other business there. There were also a lot of inquiries about the pop-up skate park on Depot Street. The Chamber, Tony Whitney, applied for a permit. It did have to go to the temporary activity. The temporary activity permit had to go to the project review board for concurrence. That happened. Public Works was going to try to drop off the equipment needed down there this week, and then there's some volunteers that are going to be working to get the skate park set up. I got to try out your new purchasing policy this week with a unique situation. So at the last meeting, you amended the purchasing policy, so if people follow the process and go out and try to get bids, if they get 3 quotes back under $100,000, the town manager or purchasing agent can sign off on them. Winslow Park was the first one, so they went out to get bids for a truck. If anyone's tried to look for a truck, hard time to buy a truck. They actually didn't get any bids back, so Neil Lyman had to go truck shopping. He went to a bunch of local dealers to see what they had in stock and that fit his specifications. He did find one at Row Auto that he was able to get a rebate for, fit the specifications, it was within budget. Because it was the unique situation that he went out to bid and nobody was interested and he had to go car shopping, I just wanted to report that back to you. is budgeted this year. It was about $59,000 that he put for the truck, and they needed it for this season to keep operations running. The other true sign of spring you might have noticed is Public Works has been out doing some striping and some just early spring repair. I know they're getting ready to stripe some parking that's already permitted and approved by ordinance. They're going to be adding the striping back to Grove Street out here to see if that makes a difference to be utilized. Another new category that I'll try to routinely report to you guys about is grants. There's a lot of interest and there's a lot of different grant opportunities out there. So Adam Bliss, our town engineer, he has been working on putting out an RFP for EV chargers on some town properties. He's putting this out as part of kind of preparation in work for an RFP that Efficiency Maine put out for communities to apply by June 30 for grant for EV chargers. As part of that, the towns have to have RFPs or quotes from contractors. That RFP information will be posted on the town's website for anyone that's interested in providing a quote for design, installation, operation, and maintenance of EV chargers on downtown municipal properties. And then finally, I just want to take a minute to recognize the town of Freeport, public safety employees, and the neighboring communities that we are mutual aid partners with. There's a very difficult situation in the news last week on I-295 in Yarmouth. Our departments were involved in responding to that, and it's just reassuring to know, as it was so close to home, that we have such dedicated and professional staff, and when the time comes, they can work together with our neighboring communities. So I just want to pass that along and give some credit because they were involved in that behind the scenes. That's all.
Thank you. Well done.
Short.
Short is welcome. We like short.
There's some historical background you left out?
I'm going to change that from 15 minutes.
Next up is our sixth order of business, which is our public comment period. And the way this works is anybody from the public has a chance to come up to the podium or grab a handheld mic so we can hear you. State your name, where you're from, and what you want to address the council about. It's not so much a time for back and forth Q&A, but more just a time to share your thoughts. And we ask that you keep your comments to items that are not already on our agenda. So if you're here for an agenda item, you can wait for that item. But if you're here for something else or just want to speak your mind, now's your chance. And if you're on Zoom, you can raise your virtual hand, and we'll try and remember to call on you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Bob Stevens from Moose Crossing. To give you a brief report about the likelihood or how it's moving for the farmers market that Freeport Climate Action now took on at your request last year, and it turned out to be a great success. It's going to be even better this year. We've already gotten Margaret Morford and Kathy High, who head that group, report that they have 23 vendors that will be looking forward to being down there at the Memorial Park this year. And that will produce part of the money that's needed for operations. Operations run around $5,000, and this won't cover everything. Again, we hope the town will continue its support of this effort that we've taken on at the request of the town, and it seems to benefit a lot of people in town. So I know you're looking forward to other ways to spend money, and we hope this is one that you will duplicate as you did last year so we can run this effectively. So that, and we've also got some good cooperation from the neighbor. The hotel is going to allow the use of their restroom facilities by vendors, and the parking lot is going to be useful as well. So we hope to have a good start this year, starting up in early June. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Yes, Councilor Bradley.
Could you draw the line between Freeport Can and the market?
Sure. There really is no line as such. Freeport Market, Freeport Farmers Market is a name under which Freeport Climate Action now does business. So in effect, it's like a division, a group that a committee, the Farmers Market Committee, which is headed by Kathy High and Margaret Morfitt, with a lot of volunteers, runs. So it had to be set up that way rather than set up, it seems silly to set up a separate total entity and have to get a 501c3 entity for that. So that's why and how it operates.
Is there a mission line between the two? Is Freeport Market implementing part of the mission of Freeport Camp?
Absolutely.
I understand, but not everybody does, so.
Okay, well, we need to make a better,
About that.
we need to make that clear. It's trying to make good food available that's locally produced as much as we possibly can find vendors that will do it. And it was also a way of bringing people together and in the community. It started out really after the pandemic. It got it going. So, yeah, it all ties in with what can be done at a local level to really diminish the emissions of greenhouse gases, if you want to think about the way it's necessary to pay transportation costs for a lot of foods that have to be sent across the nation or from other nations to that people will buy in supermarkets. Here's a way of doing things locally, avoiding those expenses. It also, we think, is it's helping, and perhaps this is a little far-fetched, but the animal products that are sold there are actually produced locally under under humane conditions, unlike those produced that we so often see at supermarkets. So I think it all comes together, and we think it helps draw the community together too.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Anybody else want to come up, share thoughts? And nobody on Zoom?
There wasn't.
All right. So moving on to our seventh order of business, which is where all the fun happens. It's where we take all our votes on orders and resolutions, the first of which is our consent agenda, which tonight has on it appointing our inspector of a variety of things, code enforcement officer, electrical inspector, plumbing inspector, and building inspector, a liquor license renewal for Sunrise Cafe, some donations to the library, and some appointments to boards and committees, Winslow Park, Hunter Road Fields, and Shellfish Commission. Is there any reason we need to separate these items and discuss them individually? Seeing none, Councillor Pillsbury, do you want to move our consent agenda?
Sure. Be it ordered that the April 25th, 2023 consent agenda be adopted.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Fournier. Any questions, comments, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Everybody? Thank you. Next up, we have two public hearings tonight, and then we're going to set two public hearings for our May 16th meeting. So the first hearing we're having tonight is regarding parking lots, or changing our zoning for parking lots, which Cecilia is going to.
Cecilia
Talk to us about-
was just present to present to you, and she had a couple changes. Do you want to see
Okay.
if you can grab her?
So we had a little bit of background on this last time when we set the public hearing, and we'll reintroduce the topic tonight. Okay.
No, because he said they only put it up when they have somebody.
We're ready for you whenever you're ready. That's all right.
They just played a trick on me again, so I noticed that there was it didn't carry on error and I had to refresh.
Thank you.
I can share this.
We can share, that's all right. We're good.
So
Yeah. So if you just want to give us a short background on why we have this before us, that'll help.
Yes. So why do you have this paper that I'm late?
Like why it's on our agenda, what's it about?
Okay. So basically, what we have is that there's a lot of standalone parking lots on the Village Commercial 1 district. However, as it currently stands, standalone parking lots are not a permitted use on the Village Commercial 1 district. So this is an amendment to allow standalone parking lots in the Village Commercial 1 district, and we're bringing this forward because we have these existing parking lots, and if somebody, since it's not an allowed use, it's basically a non-conforming. So if somebody wants to split their lot and redevelop it, they'll be creating a nonconformity, which could be a violation. So it creates problems when people are trying to redevelop these large parking lots. So that's why we're bringing this forward. And I don't want to confuse you, so I'll clarify a couple of things. So what I mean with parking lots and standalone parking lots is that they're different than like a parking structure, which is a garage. And I also misspoke because I meant they're not permitted, but there is an exception. So standalone parking lots are permitted in the Village Commercial 1 district if they are parking lots that exist to serve buildings classified as A and B per the design review ordinance on the Village Commercial 2 district. So that's the little caveat. So I found this very confusing to wrap my head around too. So, so to give an example, if somebody has just a large surface parking lot, they want to redevelop it and say build a restaurant. Right now, if you had a property, an entire lot, and you had a restaurant and a surface parking lot on it, that's okay. What I'm talking about is the surface parking lot where that's it. It's just a surface parking lot. That's the entire use of the property. If somebody had one of these large parking lots, they want to split it, and they want to build, say, a restaurant, and they have enough of the parking lot to meet the needs of that restaurant, but they want to like sell a piece of it, they wouldn't be able to, or it would be complicated to, because they would be creating a non-conforming use. So that's, a scenario that we identify could conflict with bringing forward parking lot redevelopment. So while it seems pretty counterintuitive, we're hoping that by taking this encumbrance on the nonconformity of existing surface parking lots, that will actually make it easier to redevelop them into something that's not surface parking lots. So in this process, and why I'm bringing you this last-minute amendment, is that we identify a couple of other sections that would need to be clarified or erroneous cross-referencing or cross-referencing errors. So that's why there's, proposed amendments, not just to Village Commercial 1 to allow surface parking lots or parking lots there, but also to the Village Commercial 2 district language and to Section 514. I don't know if any of you had a chance to go over the ordinance, but we can, go over it together. I could talk about the different cleanup that was involved, such as the one to the setbacks on VC1, where we're getting rid of that diagram. The planning board found that language to be very confusing, so they wanted us to clarify it. And then also we noticed that in the VC2 district and the VC1, there was a cross-reference, and this dates all the way back to the 80s, and there was a mistake on the number of it, so we're correcting that. And then in figuring out what to do, so what happens to these parking lots that are in VC1 that are actually serving VC2 districts, so we had to move that language. We moved that language to Section 514, which is parking lots with the other district requirements. And in doing that, I noticed there were other cross-referencing errors, so I fixed those. Then I copied and pasted to you. Word likes to move on to the next bullet, so it's easy to create these. So if you notice any other cross-referencing errors, please let me know. Yeah, sorry, that was very confusing.
Councilor Egan, your question?
Cecilia, do we have any applications, or at least advance notice of applications, where this fix might actually help? And is somebody coming in talking about a redevelopment of a service parking lot where this particular action that we're considering tonight could facilitate a project?
Yeah, like a more concrete example of an application where this is a burden? No, not exactly. So this is something that I believe Caroline identified with another property, but it was able to be resolved through another method, or there was.
Well, I can give you a little background. This actually came up, we had somebody looking at purchasing a piece of property in the downtown. It had a business in a parking lot. The current owner, because the parking requirements had lowered a couple of years ago, had
Didn't need all
surplus
the spot,
parking.
yeah.
So they wanted to sell the parking lot to the new property owner moving to town, but they couldn't create that lot. I won't bore you with the legal loophole we found, but it took some attorneys to find a loophole on how to get it done. This would have been much more straightforward. You're going to have to do it all night. Clearer and easier.
Okay. I just thought there was something pressing that was pushing this
It came
forward,
up
so-
from a real world situation, and when I had to say out loud mid-sentence, parking lots standalone in Freeport aren't a permitted use, I got some looks.
Councilor Fournier.
So this is part of fixing a lot of issues that we're finding and trying to make the ordinance more usable friendly, and it's been endorsed by the planning board, so I'm hoping that we get it done tonight. So thank you.
Got it. While you have the microphone, do you want to open the public hearing?
Certainly. I'd like to make a motion to open public hearing.
Second.
Thank you, all in favor? All right, so if anybody wants to speak to these changes to the zoning ordinance regarding parking lots in the downtown district, now is your chance. Come on up to the microphone, Cecilia will make room for you. If not, and there's nobody on Zoom, then Fournier, I guess it's your
Sure.
chance to close.
Motion to close public hearing.
All right. All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Now, before we read the item, there's an amendment that Cecilia's passed around, which we should refer to. Ed, can you pass that down? Is there a way to cleanly,
You would just say as amended?
well, the amendment hasn't been published, that's why I'm just wondering if we can read the relevant parts.
Vote on an amended, can you vote on an amended item if the amendment wasn't subject to the hearing?
It's non-substantial, it's just correcting a cross-reference, so yes.
Okay.
You would want to, I think, read it into the record, or at least discuss it so it's clear. Cecilia can explain it to you.
Yep.
That's easier.
So in section 514, I tried to double check and make sure I fixed all the other wrong cross-references in the process, but it always tricks you. And last week, after I had sent this paperwork to you, I noticed that two of my cross-references were incorrect. One of them because the last time we updated 514, it also did not get corrected, so I moved it on to the next section, and that was an error. And the other one was an error that I did just now with, so that would be on section 514, B2, and then B, and then on the table, too. So it could be very confusing if you have a wrong cross-reference because you don't really understand what it's talking about, and then the ordinance doesn't make any sense. But
Councilor
so
Fournier.
I do apologize for that.
Under the be ordained, so if we add sections, you have 514, and if we add 514.b.2, and then 514.b.8, would that clarify what needs to get done in this?
Well, I think section 514 covers the whole thing. It's more a question of just reading in the specific changes, right? So we can read this and then say including the updated cross-references in section 514. Would that cover it?
As presented at
As
the
presented
meeting.
at the meeting?
Okay.
Want to try that?
So, okay, I'll give it a shot. You'll have to, okay. Be ordained that proposed amendments to Section 413, Village Commercial 1, VC-1, Sections 414, Village Commercial 2, VC-2, and Sections 514. Is this where we had that?
Including the updated cross-references.
Including the updated cross-references for off-street parking and lodging of the Freeport zoning ordinance be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. All right, are there other questions or discussions at the council about what we're doing? It's a quiet room tonight. All right, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor of the updated ordinance?
Aye.
That's everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia.
Yes, thank you.
Our second public hearing tonight is about our library board of directors, which we heard a little bit about last time, and we have our library director here to remind us what this is about.
See if I can spice it up with library administration. Probably not. Okay, so to recap what we discussed last time, Freeport Community Library was established in 1997. Prior to that, it was the B.H. Bartoll Library, which was a private lending library, so a certified nonprofit. So when Freeport Community Library came into existence, it became an official town department, and the town took over all management of the library. Peter Joseph and I discovered not too long ago that both the administrative code and the personal code have some inconsistent management rights. He had actually discovered that previously when he appointed Arlene Aris, and he discussed that a bit last meeting. But, other projects took priority. He and I had discussed it briefly. Again, other projects rose to the top of the list. So when he was leaving, we revisited our work that was unfinished and decided that it would be prudent to get this taken care of. So what we are asking for are changes to the administrative code. The personnel code changes will come later. They are wrapped into a larger revision of that document. But to summarize, the issue here is that currently the language does not give the library director and the town manager management rights to be able to fully manage the library. So for instance, if there was a challenge or an issue with a personnel decision, as it's written right now, the town manager would not be able to take care of that. Those rights are given to the library board. I have asked the library board, which is an advisory board, to review these issues. They have voted to support the changes to the personnel code as well as the administrative code. And you'll see in your packet, there is supporting documentation that shows in 2009 that library board reviewed what their purpose was and agreed that they were an advisory board.
Thank you for summing it up.
Welcome.
Any questions for Ms. Sparks before we open the public hearing? Councilor Daniele, do you want to open the public hearing?
I move to open the public hearing.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Councilor Bradley. All in favor?
Aye.
So for all of you that want to line up to talk to us about the Library Board of Trustees changes, I see Chief Goodman coming in. No?
I'm just grabbing something off the table.
He wants to take over. He's going to be my deputy.
Try to rope him in. Anybody want to talk about the Library Board of Trustees? Anybody on Zoom waiting? No. All right, Councilor Daniele, is
I move to close the public hearing.
there a second?
I second that as well.
Thank you, Councilor Bradley. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, Councilor Daniele, do you want to read the motion?
Be it ordained that amendments to Chapter 2 Administrative Code, Section 608, Community Library Board of Directors to remove management rights of the Library Board of Trustees be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Bradley. Any council discussion on the matter? All right, all in favor? That's two.
Aye.
That was everybody. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Sparks. Nice to see you as always. Next up, we have two public hearings to set. These are being set for our May 16th meeting to give us adequate notice to the public, to make sure they have enough time to attend the public hearing if they wish. The first of them is regarding our new building codes, which this says our town manager is going to remind us about briefly.
Sure. So at the last meeting, the town council adopted amendments to the administrative code. The administrative code referenced ordinance or the codes that the code officer enforces. Before you tonight, you have the building code ordinance, and that actually lists out the codes we use. So it's really two parts, and it's much cleaner if they match. Really, at the end of the day, this is the ordinance of the two that you would want that language in. One thing I want to clarify is Nick, our code officer, did talk to the state of Maine today about what codes they're going to adopt. There was some talk at the last meeting that this is going to be the code that the states adopts, and so then we'll kind of be on level playing ground. That is not entirely the case at this point. Nick said there are a couple different options the state is considering. They are looking at the 2021 stretch code, which you're, again, putting into this ordinance, which you already did in the other ordinance last month. One of their discussions was adopting possibly an amended version, in which case Freeport's 2021 as it exists would actually be a little stricter, but the state's also looking at some 2024 codes. So the timing's up in the air, and the exact code that the state is going to make municipalities adopt is up in the air. I just wanted to clarify that for you based upon the new information that Nick got from the state today. Again, is really just here to mirror what you did last month.
And just to clarify, sorry, the language here, we're adopting the 2015, some 2015 codes, but the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. But the other codes are 2015 codes.
Right, so we just pasted that language from one document into the other just to be cleaner. We didn't list them all out, so it's really no change other than the stretch code. That's the change that you were intending to make with the simple amendment. Again, we're just trying to clean stuff up as we go.
Got it. Councilor Fournier.
When I voted for the proposal, it was my understanding we were going to mirror the state. I guess I have some concerns if we're going to have additional requirements that will be above and beyond the state. Now, I guess I'd like to know what those are. I think our whole, at least my position is we want to be more user-friendly or whatever. Now we're creating more of a burden that if you come to Freeport to conduct business and building something, there's going to be a different set of codes that aren't applicable in other spots in the state. And I'm all in favor of the idea behind the stretch code to make it more energy efficient. I was sold on that. I just don't want to have additional burdens which complicate our jobs, and we already got a black eye, so to speak, on code enforcement in this town.
I would say my conversation from Nick is we don't know. The state's looking at different options until they adopt something we don't know. You essentially at the last meeting said that, you know, we were going to have Nick enforce this code, so we already have it kind of half on the books. If the state does change their other codes, you're going to have to revisit both of these documents because it's more than just the stretch code that you're going to have to amend. So, you know, I think if you're going to open it back up, then you could, at that point, mirror the state if it's more stringent or less stringent, if that's what you want to do. It would give you time to try this out and see how it's working in Freeport, if people are having challenges meeting it or not. I think, you know, there was some question on that.
Did you say one of the options the state was considering was the 2024 codes?
Nick said there was some talk about some 2024 codes. I don't think those have actually been released by the Code Council, so if they were going to do that, it probably could bump us out further, or bump the state out further.
I'm sorry, I'm standing because of my knee, not because of a need to be observed. Thanks, Ray. So I'm with Daryl to a certain extent. I mean, we adopted the stretch code because we were getting recommendations from staff and that we wanted to move into the world that the state lived in. And now the state's moving into another world. And the question is, does that in any way detract from the advice we got before?
I would say, as a friendly solution, knowing that you have this to set the hearing tonight, you know, again, you did part of the code at the last meeting. Here's a second code to our advantage, which Chris might not like this because I'm going to notice you have an agenda in the middle. If you want me to get some more information and details from the code officer, I'm happy to bring them back. You could talk about them next week before you get to this hearing, or you could put this hearing off. When you adopted that code at the last meeting, it doesn't become effective until July 1, so you don't have to do this tonight. We're just trying to clean everything up and get it going, but you're not delaying it if you want to table setting this hearing tonight until we get more information. It's definitely not something I could answer on the fly. It was not meant to cause confusion. It was just meant to bring some transparency and to let you know where we heard from the state today, where they stand.
Councillor Egan?
I guess I'm not any kind of an expert on the code, but I follow what, particularly around the energy standards that the main building industry is adopting and moving into on its own. And I'll just remind folks what we talked about last time, that the code that we're talking about adopting is the 2021, 2 years ago, was adopted by the Maine Uniform Building Code Council. So there was an endorsement 2 years ago for this level of efficiency that's outlined in the code language, and I don't have that on my fingertips, so I can't tell you exactly what that is. The state's enforcement of that is a political process, not a technical process, and so that's what is taking time for the state adoption to then require municipalities to adopt. But the code itself is already 2 years behind, so I don't feel like we're getting out in front of anybody. The code that we're operating under today, before we change anything here, is the 2015 code. So I think it is plenty time for us to be adopting to more current standards that the Maine Uniform Building Code Council has already adopted.
Councillor Pillsbury, do you want to add something?
Well, but part of this is hypothetical, right? We don't know what the state's going to do and what their timeline is. So we've started a process. I guess the question is, should we finish it and then pivot when the state finally does what they're going to do, and then we have to address it and deal with it? Or do we just stop what we're doing and just wait? Because that could be weeks, it could be months, who knows, right?
My recollection, for what it's worth, is that we're doing this knowing that we're a little bit ahead of the state, but there were several other municipalities that were also adopting this code. I'll get them wrong if I try and name them, but I know that there are a bunch around here in our vicinity that had adopted it and hadn't reported any significant problems, because we'd asked that question to say, how did it go in these other towns? But that I thought we were aware that, we're adopting it before the state was adopting their enforcement of it, but that the code itself was a couple of years old, as Councilor Egan said. So I'm comfortable moving forward. And we're always going to be a little bit out of sync with the state, because we'll change, they'll change, we'll change. Sometimes we'll be ahead, sometimes we'll be behind. So right now, we're kind of in limbo because we have it half on the books and half not on the books. So unless you guys want to vote to remove what we did last time, which I think would be a bad idea, I'd be in favor of, at the very least, setting the public hearing, but I'm also in support of the motion itself. So, Councilor Fournier.
I'd like a little more information on it. Nick obviously has raised some issues, and I'd like a little more information, because, again, what I voted for and what is coming forward is a little bit different. And I just want to make sure I know the road we're going down.
Could change again by next meeting, Darrell. I don't know.
Exactly, and it could. And again, I don't want to adopt something that gives us more difficulty for people coming in here this town to do business, because we're trying to correct all the mistakes that we've got over years of different things, so.
Okay. So all we're doing tonight is setting the public hearing, so we could, we could vote on the 16th not to adopt it if we choose. Any other council discussion on this? So you guys ready to vote on setting the public hearing for the 16th?
Is there any comment?
There's a public hearing, the 16th would be the time to comment?
On the agenda, comment tonight.
Yes, can I comment on this now?
On setting the public hearing, whether or not to set a public hearing? Sure.
Thank you. The state is dragging its feet. It does that every time. It has to deal with a lot of people who don't show up at meetings. They don't make decisions when they ought to make them. You've heard testimony in this room from any number of people, including experts in the building trade, as to the very limited increase in cost that would result from moving from the 2015 code to the 2021. It's less than 1%. You've also heard that it increases the efficiency and also reduces the greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 10%. It is also will result in improvements to the property that increase their value. It's time to move on. If we need further discussion and evidence produced at a public hearing, we'll have it. We'll bring more people here. Hundreds have signed the petition. This has gone on far too long. Please proceed with the public hearing.
Councilor Egan, do you want to read the motion?
Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for May 16th, 2023 at the Town Council meeting starting at 6 p.m. in Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, to discuss amendments to Chapter 11 Building Code Ordinance of the Town of Freeport to adopt stretch energy codes effective July 1, 2023.
Second?
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any other discussion? All in favor of setting the public hearing?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's all of us. Thank you. So we'll have a public hearing on the 16th for that item. Next up is item 70-23 regarding setting a public hearing to update our nuisance ordinance to include lighting. And I think you have some background on this?
Sure, so this is something that Peter had been working on with some residents. They have an issue in their neighborhood with some lighting. They had worked with Peter had worked with the town attorney to draft some language before you tonight. It would add a new section to the existing loitering, curfew, and noise ordinance. There'd be a new proposed section for nuisance lighting. It would include adding standards for light trespass where it goes over the property line, and also refer to the type of fixtures, full cutoff fixtures being required so that the light is not shining off of the property. Also in here would be a new reference under enforcement, enforcing any violations the same way as we do noise violations, and then renaming the ordinance. Happy to answer questions, or if you have questions that I don't have full background to, you take note and get answers for the public hearing.
Councilor Pillsbury.
Can you try to just put in layman's terms what light trespass is and like what that would actually look like? Because it's a little bit, it's just not clear in terms of what that would look like on someone's property.
My understanding is the purpose of this standard is to make it so that if you or your neighbor has a bright light shining off of their property and onto yours, whether it be the way they're shining it, the type of fixture, you could then call PD as you would feel like you have a nuisance situation. So like leaving the property and I think more intentionally disrupting others. A full cutoff fixture, you can't usually see the source of the light. A lot of the LED fixtures now meet that, so you might have this nice decorative fixture, but the bulb's up, so it kind of minimizes that sky glow or the light going outward. You notice like a lot of the LED ones shine straight down.
There's a
Don't tend to
standard
leave.
too, right, that could be measured?
Yeah, so they measure
Intensity or
light
crossing
and
it.
foot candles. It's the light measurement. We do it for commercial projects or multifamily residential.
Councilor Daniele.
Is the police the correct person to respond to something like this versus codes?
This ordinance is currently enforced by our police department. I mean, honestly, it probably makes sense. Codes is a Monday through Thursday, 7:30 to 6 office, and there's 7 days in a week. So, if it's happening on the weekend or outside business hours and really causing a nuisance, the code officer wouldn't be here to respond in a timely fashion.
Most of this would be at night anyway.
Right,
Most
and
of
it would be
these
at night,
nuisances,
yep.
Good point.
Any other questions for Caroline? So I think we've heard about this issue before as well. I've seen pictures and all that. Nuisance is sort of an understatement, I think. any comments before we set the public hearing? You don't need to. The public hearing itself is on the 16th, so that would be a good time to come with any and all comments. But since we let the last guy speak about setting a public hearing, if you have any comments about setting the public hearing, you're welcome to make them. Otherwise, we can go ahead and set it. Sure.
My name's Art Dysinger. I live at 7 Buttercup Drive, Freeport. I would like to show this gentleman, he has a question about light trespass, if I can approach.
Sure.
This is light trespass. This is coming from a house across my street. Lights up my house tonight, lights up the drive, everything. That's light trespass.
No, I appreciate you showing the pictures. I remember when you brought them the last time. They were extremely helpful. I'm in support of this. I just wanted to better understand, what it means at the boundary of someone's property. That was my question.
Okay.
So I can see how that is that's clearly light trespass. But I'm just wondering if
Property line, property line. Those property line.
no, but I'm just wondering, it says, it makes reference of a 1 foot square from a distance of 1 foot. And I just didn't know, so if you have a light here, are you only able to go, if you had a light that was a foot from your property line, like a candle, is it light trespass if it goes beyond your boundary? I mean, maybe this is, I'm just wondering how this is going to be enforced and what questions may pop up. And I just wasn't clear from reading the draft ordinance what we're getting into. I mean, the case that the gentleman's showing us is clear, we need to do something, but there will be other questions on the other side of it.
Yeah.
John might have a little more background on this, too.
Yeah, we had several conversations, both with the residents as well as with our town attorney on that exact issue, Matt, in terms of trying to get to language that is enforceable, that can be interpreted by who's ever responding, so that there is a clear definition of what a nuisance is and what would constitute a trespass. So it has everything to do with the intensity and the foot candle power that can be measured at the boundary line. And so I think, it probably makes sense for us to get some devices that our PD can use so that there can be a undisputable definition at that point, and it's not, well, I think it is and I think it isn't. So we'd like to remove that ambiguity from any enforcement activities. But the language that we have was actually worked on heavily by our attorney to try and navigate that with input from a couple of council members and the staff, as well as from the residents. So it's been hammered on quite a lot to get to this point.
All right. Councilor Pillsbury, can I call on you to read the motion? We're going to come back to Councilor Bradley for the next one.
Sure. Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for May 16th, 2023 at the Town Council meeting starting at 6 p.m. in Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, to discuss proposed amendments to Chapter 39 Loitering, Curfew, and Noise Ordinance of the Town of Freeport.
Second?
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any other discussion? All in favor of setting the public hearing?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? All right. So that passes unanimously. So we have a public hearing on the 16th when we'll vote potentially to adopt the change in the ordinance. The next item on our agenda is item 71-23, which is here at Councilor Bradley's request. So I'll let him introduce it.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to thank the leadership for putting this on the agenda, because there was some confusion about its status before that, and this gives us a chance to clarify that. I'm chair of the sewer committee, maybe co-chair, I can't remember, it goes back so far. There are a number of sewer committee people in the audience tonight to listen and perhaps to comment if they see fit. But what I'd like to do is to lay out the recommendations as they came up, and as to they have been modified to a small extent after conversations with both the sewer committee and the members of the council to get something that would pass and accomplish the goals. So the first recommendation is to create a downtown contingency fund that could address the burdens that connection fees provide for qualified projects in the downtown that support the downtown visioning. The earlier recommendation was a $100,000 fund. It's been pointed out that there's an existing $40,000 fund for that purpose, and all we really need to do is add 60 to that to get to the 100. And also, the suggestion was, don't limit it simply to connection fees. There may be other projects in the downtown that qualify for this kind of funding, and I have no objection to that, and none of the members of the SOAR committee did. So the recommendation is that we create a $100,000 fund for qualified projects that reduce burdens to downtown development resulting from the downtown revisioning process. So that's recommendation number one. Recommendation number two was to do joint CIP planning, sewer district and the town. So to authorize the town to coordinate and collaborate with the sewer district for capital improvement planning so that there aren't, to eliminate projects that are inefficient or conflicting, and to collaborate in a way that cooperation leads to benefits to both. And there's no fiscal note to that at all other than what's involved in the CIP planning process already. And the third is to identify and apply for grants that benefit the sewer district if deemed appropriate by the town council. And this one I really screwed up on when I drafted the sewer committee recommendation, because it looked like a recommendation for $400,000 worth of budget funding. And I didn't mean that at all, and the sewer committee didn't recommend that. What they recommended was a joint process to identify grants that the town could apply for, that the sewer district might not or did not qualify for, that benefited the sewer district and the town. And then, if they were identified, leave it to the council to determine whether to apply. And finally, if it got the grant, to determine in some future budget process whether or not to apply the match if any was needed. So that's the recommendation. The only other item that's here is that in this grant application process, there's an expense. It's not, a bunch of volunteers aren't going to put effective grant applications together, either identify them in the first place or develop them in the second place. There's already $5,000 in this year's budget for that. But we're not going to use it in this year's budget. In June, when the fiscal year switches, that will go away, and what we're recommending is that that be continued into the next fiscal year so that it's available for the process that the grant application, joint grant application collaboration anticipates. So those are the three recommendations. The fourth is really, for me as chair, to identify and to thank the members of the committee, which I'm going to do by name. Lee Aris, the chair of and executive director of the sewer district. Sally Leland, one of the members of the district committee. Brett Richardson, who has been our FEDC representative on this committee. Brent Bridges, who's been the consultant to the sewer district on their application for the $19 million grant that they're applying for. Dan Bacon, who's an FEDC member who's been on the committee. Rod Wazier, who's a former town councilor and a resident and a neighbor of all of this, who's been an active member on the committee. Darrell Fournier, the other council member on the committee. And Peter Joseph, who, until his retirement or his resignation or his departure, was an effective member of the committee. They all worked hard. They worked diligently. They worked creatively to come up with these recommendations, which does two things principally. One, it answers the council's request to the committee to address connection fees without dragging the town and the sewer district into governance discussions that might create sort of issues that are impossible to resolve without more experience together. Secondly, it allows the sewer district and the town in a productive initial way to gain experience with one another dealing with substantive issues that will lead to a better sewer district and a better community. So for all of those reasons, I hope you'll support these recommendations. And obviously, there are still some people in the audience who may have things they want to add or clarify, and I certainly welcome them to come to the podium to express that. Seeing none, if there aren't any, I don't mean to quicken that, but, Lee Harris has been the heart and soul of this effort. I mean, you know, he's got his background, he's got his history, he's swallowed it all to work, to move forward in a positive way for both the sewer district and the town. And I want to thank him for that. The other thanks I constantly give is to Rod, because his intellect and insights are always helpful in these committee discussions, and his insights led to one of the suggestions that I think greased the opportunity to come forward with recommendations without a lot of confusion. So having said that, and seeing nobody who wants to come forward, I will pass the podium to whomever. Kenny?
Yeah.
You?
Yeah.
Of all people.
How you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. This is new to me, so this is the first time I've heard of it. It seemed to me in your narrative that this applied to the downtown, not the whole commercial zones. Example, Route 1 South. Is that the way it works? As far as assistance with the hookup fees?
Well, there's three parts to this, okay? The first part is connection fees.
That's right.
And that's just from a sewer perspective. But the fund that we're recommending creating applies to any project in the downtown visioning arena that has an impediment that could be addressed by funding. So it could be anywhere in the district. It doesn't have.
That's my question. Does Route 1 South come into this as far as assistance with hookup fees?
I don't know. Is there? Yeah. Well, yeah, because the Frost Gully Brook is in Route 1 South, right? If there's Kenny, if there's a project that comes up through downtown visioning that whether it's in wherever it is in town, and sometimes they are directly in the downtown because that's where the effort and energy has been focused. Sometimes they're outside because they affect the downtown. Mallet Drive might be a good example. The complete streets circle around the community to connect transportation and locomotion to different sites is another example. It isn't directly in the downtown, but a project could qualify for downtown visioning funding. And then that fund, that $100,000 fund, is available. It's not going to be an appropriation in the sense that it'll go to a specific project, but it's available for the council to fund help for a project that they deems it qualifies in the future.
I just wanted to be clear
Yeah.
that if I'm a developer, I buy a piece of property on Route 1 South, and I come to whoever I need to come to for assistance with the hookup fee, and they're going to say to me, oh, you're not in the downtown, therefore you do not qualify. It doesn't seem to be clear in here. It doesn't seem to be clear from what you're saying, Ed. So if there's some way to make that clear, I would appreciate putting it in there.
Okay, yeah, all I can say is that one piece of this that still is undeveloped is what constitutes a qualified project. And
where? My thing is...
What constitutes is both, how did it come up and arise, and where is it? So that definition is still in development. We'll certainly bring this issue to those people who are developing. I understand that's happening at the FEDC.
So can I attempt to clarify and tell me if I get this right? It's a little bit confusing, and it's confusing for us as well. What we're looking at now is accepting the results of what the sewer committee has done, and they have some recommendations to give to us. So all we're doing is saying, thank you for that work, we accept the recommendations. Next up, we have our capital program, which is our 5-year plan of how we intend to spend money over the next 5 years. And I anticipate that based on how this discussion goes, there may be an amendment to that program to add some additional money for, say, a $100,000 fund, hypothetically. The parameters of that fund have not been defined. The mechanism of that fund has not been defined. It could be a fund that the council administers. It could be part of a TIF. It could be something else. Or, it might not get in there. So there are no parameters now about what's included, what's excluded, because the fund doesn't exist, and that's still some work ahead of us. I would say I hope that clarifies, but I know it doesn't. But it just helps to add some context anyway. Councilor Fournier.
But that's a good question to add to the mix as you go through the process. So thank you for that.
Serving on the committee, when this idea was brought up, it was my understanding that we would look at the whole system, i.e., you have Lower Mass Landing Road where you have a pressurized pipe that goes across. That was discussed. We talked about Route 1 South. So it wasn't the intent to have one specific area. I think we were trying to address issues system-wide that the committee looked at. So I I understand what you're saying, and probably that's going to be clarified in our next step as we finalize that, that particular qualification grant.
Sally, Lynn? Sally?
Sally Leland. I'm a trustee on the sewer board. I think for clarification purposes, the recommendation would be where there is existing infrastructure now, any intersection of any new project could tie into the existing infrastructure now. Am I reading that correctly?
You talking about sewer infrastructure?
I'm talking about any new development. So with your question about something going in down on Route 1 South, there's existing infrastructure there. We have mains there, and we have pump stations there. So anything down as far as the Freeport Cafe, Best Western, if somebody wants to tie into something on Route 1 down there, that would be fine with us.
Not to add the confusion anymore, Andrew Arsenault, if we can tie in at any spot on where the system is already in, and you're going to, my understanding that the idea is to reduce fees, to encourage development of any kind? Is there a specific type of development? Single family, two family, business? How's this going to work? Because I mean, I walk up and down the road, I call Lee or somebody, and the sewer's breaking, and it costs thousands of dollars to have them come down and fix it. And of course, some of the cost is, we get that from hookup fees and entrance fees and monthly fees. And I know Lee tells me it's quite expensive to have, the sewer pump guy sit there all weekend or night after night while they're fixing a blowout. So, I mean, I know I certainly would like to pay less when I hook up, if I do, but, I also wonder how's the financing going to work if we do away with some of these hookup fees?
This just to clarify, this does not do away with any connection fees. What it does is it provides town money.
So the town's going to pay my hookup fee?
It could pay part of a hookup fee or all of a hookup fee for a project that under the downtown process it felt was desirable.
Well, that's not Route 1 South.
Some of it could be, though, Andy. It wouldn't be necessarily, I mean, I don't know. As Dan said, we haven't gotten to the definitional part of that yet. And certainly the questions you have can be anticipated at that point.
So I got to pay a hookup fee, but the guys downtown building something bigger don't. Or my taxes are going to subsidize somebody else's hookup fee.
That clearly could happen, yeah, because we...
Well, that seems fair.
Well, good.
I'm all for that.
Good.
Jesus. Sounds like regular government.
I'm Rod Verrier. I was on the sewer committee, and I'm a sewer district user. I don't have a lot to add, except I'm just very, very glad this conversation is happening here with you at your dais, because as it began originally, there was an effort to push the sewer district just to deal with the subsidizing connection fees on its own. And as you know, of course, the sewer district is an independent body, independent of the town council. It has its own governance structure, its own ability to hire, fire, bill people, to be able to incur debt. And it's to begin trying to alter their fees. It's something that really is appropriate if this is a public advantage. Your dais is the level at which this discussion needs to be happening. I'm very glad that it is right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leland Harris, I'm the general manager of the plant. I'm in my 13th year there. A couple of things are happening that is exactly why I think probably the most beneficial part of this sewer committee, and I want to make it clear for people who don't really understand, which probably be people leading. We're not talking about the sewer board, the board of trustees. That's a total independent board that runs the sewer committee. The sewer that runs the Freeport Sewer District. The board is a board that the town council here, the sewer committee that Ed chaired, is a group that was formed at the request of the town council, and that's what we're talking about. Now, one of the things that's always, in my experience between the town and the sewer, has been kind of lack of information on both parts, not a lot of really good communication. And I think, a couple of our citizens come up here and said, this is the first I've heard of this. This is kind of the thing that I think has been a problem in the past. And so I think the biggest benefit that we're getting here at this stage is that we've actually gotten together. Rod mentioned it. We've gotten together and we're starting to talk about things. I would like to just clarify that the issue that both gentlemen here brought up about who qualifies, who pays, that's not a sewer district issue. Okay, that's a town council issue, and the sewer district is, they have a different interest in this. Their interest is in the in making sure that they have their present fees available to continue improving the sewer district. So I want to thank the council for the first time. We have two council members that actually participated with sewer district trustees and various citizens to try to come together and have a better understanding of each other. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I'll kind of weigh in with some thoughts on this here. I think it's wonderful what the sewer committee has done. I think the progress we've made, the communications that we started is great. It sounds like it's a lot more than we've been able to do in many, many years, certainly before my time on the council. So I appreciate the work of the committee. And I'm in favor of accepting the recommendations as a result of the work they've done. To clarify, the recommendations that I think Councilor Bradley's bringing before us is slightly different than what's written down. I just want to kind of reiterate that to make sure that I have it straight and for the public's benefit as well. So of the three recommendations, one is to approve town funding for $100,000 for qualified projects in downtown. There's a lot of discussion about that. I want to come back to that. The second one is approving a town match of up to $400,000, but now we're saying we're not really anticipating that we need to approve that $400,000 tonight. It's more about we should investigate the possibility of applying for grants together or investigating grants together. And then the third is pretty much as is, which is joint capital improvement planning, which makes sense as well. So then back to item one, the $100,000 fund. The discussion I've had with Councilor Bradley a couple of times about this is that I think it would be worthwhile for us to define as a town what kinds of qualified projects we want to incentivize. So is it single-family housing? Is it multifamily housing? Is it commercial? Is it retail? What kinds of things do we want to see, and how can we help make those happen? I don't think it would be a good idea to limit the use of the fund to just sewer connection fees. If you want to use this incentive money that we may come up with to pay in sewer connection fees, great. If you want to use it to pay building permitting fees, great. If you want to use it to pay for engineering work, that's fine too. So I think it should be more broad in its use, and I still think we need to spend some time deciding what kinds of development we want to incentivize. Once we have that discussion, we may decide that there's a better mechanism to do it, right? If we have a transit-oriented development TIF in the works and we say that there's a credit enhancement agreement as a result of that, that might be more than $100,000. But we want to spend that on qualified development projects. So I still think there's a lot of work to be done with that. I like the spirit of where it's going, but I think we need to do more work before we add that amount of funding. But again, I'm supportive of the work the committee's done and would happy to accept their recommendations. Councilor Bradley.
Yeah, I mean, to the comments made and to response to you, clearly, what qualifies for this funding is to be developed. But the sewer committee's recommendation is to provide funding that sewer connection fee issues can apply for. That others could apply for it as well is fine, as you define the definition. But if you do not put in the budget, or your intention is to not include in this year's capital budget an increase in the $40,000 fund you got with no definition, to include more that could also be used for this purpose, then I think that's a rejection of the committee's recommendation to include in this year's budget an increase in funding for qualified projects as they will be defined by this council with the input of people like Kenny and Andy in this audience at a time before that money is spent. So I heard in what you said you don't want to support adding the 100 or more than 40 to the budget, but I think that's, you can vote any way you want, obviously, but that is not consistent with the recommendation that the sewer committee is making.
Councilor Fournier?
I'm just wondering to throw it out for discussion on item 1, to approve town funding for sewer connection fees, qualified projects, and then in the amount not to exceed $100,000. If we take away the downtown district, I think that goes back to Sally's point that it's district-wide. Wherever we have infrastructure, I think that's a fair approach too, and that may help go over one hurdle. And then we can now focus on what the projects are within where the district services. I don't know if that would work or not.
Other comments? Questions? Councilor Pillsbury.
So if we vote to approve the recommendation, but we don't fund it. I mean, to Ed's point, we've said we don't agree with this. But is there a way for us to, because I agree with the recommendation. I think the committee has done a great job. I think this is good common ground, and I think it's a step forward. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done around funding for qualified projects that are sewer-related or just development-related. And I think that's where we can have some work still to be done. And I don't think that's a quick answer. And I don't, because I don't know what percentage, so this 100,000, I mean, how many connection fees is that? What scope of projects would that support? How do we balance giving X percentage for a large development versus a smaller percentage for a smaller development? I mean, these are all things to be worked out, and we've never even had that conversation. I mean, this is the first time it's coming up. And I don't want to slow things down, but I can't also in good faith just say, sure, let's set aside a pot of money that we don't really know what we're going to do with, and we don't have a mechanism for delivering results on it. So I guess I'm just wondering, if we vote yes to accept the recommendations, what are our options to not just straight funding it, if that makes sense?
I'll try and just address it procedurally, and then I know Councilor Daniele has something to say. We haven't heard from him yet, and back to Councilor Bradley as well. But just procedurally, there's a little footnote here. The items in the recommendations, right, specifically the $100,000 in this case, is not yet in the capital program. If we want it to be in the capital program, someone will need to make an amendment to say before we accept the capital program tonight, before we approve the capital program, we would need to amend it to add the $100,000 to it. So it's feasible that we could accept the recommendations but not fund it, as you say.
But it's only adding 60,000.
No, my view is different. So the $40,000 we haven't really got to yet, that was for a different use. So there is $40,000 for downtown projects, not specifically for connection fees.
For sure.
So Councilor Daniele, we haven't heard from, and then we'll go back to Councilor Bradley.
My understanding is that we're accepting these recommendations, as in we have heard these recommendations. That is the first step, right? Not saying that we're definitely doing all of them, but just thank you, we appreciate it. Yes? Okay.
Is that what you think you're doing? What I think,
yeah.
What I think we're doing is what we've done with every charter group that ever came forward to this council, some with no definition, some with specific definitions, and said, okay, we're going to put the money the project that they recommend, because they're good people and we respect them, and the money that they've identified into the queue. And it's all ended up, and I've got a list here of what's ended up, and it's $2,725,000 of money that's ended up in capital budget, based on much less, in many cases, definition that the sewer committee's given you after a lot more work than many of those other committees have done. And that's not to disrespect them, it's just to show you that you're handling this a little bit differently. All we're asking is that, not that that $100,000 be appropriated, but that it be in the queue, so that when decisions are made, as they will be made when you go to finally adopt the budget, and then finally to appropriate the money, that you have a discussion about the sewer committee recommendations, $100,000 suggestion, along with those that have already reached that point in your process. And somehow we got left out of that because there was confusion about what we were saying that night. We spent a lot of time trying to bring clarity to that. And now we're having the same conversation all over again, even though, and I'll just say it, I've had these conversations with every counselor on the dais, and at no point in the last 3 days has anybody had the kinds of reservations that are being expressed here. I said, and I don't care anymore about process and how it works at the council level, but if it is not fun, it's not clear to me, and all I'm saying is what we're asking for is that $100,000 to go into the queue with all the other $2,725,000 worth of projects that have other conditions and other timing and other things, and ask that they take the same rightful place in the conversation about, first, whether they're a priority, and second, whether the funding is going to be appropriated. If you don't do that now, that conversation doesn't occur while these other 14 projects go through the queue. It waits for something like what Matt's talking about, which looks vague, but I understand that at the FEDC level is ongoing discussion about what qualifies for the kind of money that Dan's talking about and the kind of money that, the kind of projects Dan's talking about and the kind of projects we're talking about. We're focused on sewer connections. We don't care if the pot of money goes to other things as well, as long as it covers appropriate sewer connection projects that the council at a future time decides are worth funding because they advance the downtown visioning process. That's what you set us out to do. Now we've given you a way to do that without having to deal with all of the governance issues between the district and the town council or the town, and we're getting a resistance because we're not clear enough. Well, I don't think anything will ever be clear enough until you get to the point where it's in the queue, it's been identified as a priority, and then appropriated. All those things are still ahead of us. If you stop it now, you stop this recommendation from reaching that status, and I think that'd be a shame. Committees worked very hard to get to this point.
Other comments? Councilor Bradley, do you want to read the motion?
Sure. With the adjustments to the memo, or just the
Probably a good idea, just because the memo is published with the agenda, so.
Yeah. Be it ordered that the recommendations of the sewer committee be accepted. Those recommendations are to approve town funding for qualified projects in the downtown district in an amount not to exceed $100,000. Caveat, my understanding is that would require an increase in an existing fund of 40 to 60. Second, to approve the town's applications for funds to benefit the sewer district, which could include matches of up to $400,000. 3, to approve town participation in joint sewer district town capital improvement planning on an annual basis. And 4, to extend the $5,000 support for grant applications for the town to apply for funding from various sources that could benefit the sewer district and the town together.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Egan. Any other discussion?
What's the 5,000 again?
There's $5,000 in the budget now.
Oh, never mind. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Forgot about that.
Councilor Fournier?
I thought earlier we were saying we're going to do funding and matches. We're going to take the $400,000 out, but look at helping with that, right?
Helping with what?
The grant process or whatever. I
Yeah,
don't.
that's the 5,000.
Okay, so the 400,000, I think that's.
It's sort of a limit on the amount, on the
amount,
kinds of
yeah.
grants you go looking for.
Okay, but are you looking to put that into the capital budget, or you, no? Okay, that clarifies a lot for me. Perfect, thank you, Ed. Okay, now I think we're all a lot clearer.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
Sorry for being so vague.
All right, any other discussion? All right, all in favor of accepting the recommendations of the sewer committee?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Oh, you need a second.
I second it.
Yeah, I did, yep. Any opposed? So that passes unanimously. So with our thanks to the sewer committee for all the work they've done.
Thank you very much for that discussion and for the support. And I would like, as the final sewer committee request, that you dissolve the sewer committee so that we don't have any ongoing obligations to either meet or to discuss these things until such time as the council thinks they want to reconstitute it for some particular reason, and we would know what that is.
That's a fair request. I don't remember the original ordinance, whether it dissolves upon submitting a report, but if there's no objection, I think we can dissolve the sewer committee. Seeing none, I think we can safely do that. Okay. Whew. We now have our capital program to look at, and our finance director has run away.
She ran to go get a last-minute coffee.
Oh, she did, okay.
And just to clarify, this is the program, not the capital budget for FY '24.
Correct. So this is our plan for what we think we're going to spend, what kinds of capital funds we think we're going to spend over the next 5 years. It's not allocating or appropriating any money for the next fiscal year.
Okay.
Can we, I don't see any reason why we couldn't vote to take the next item out of order, give Jessica some time to do that.
Sure.
So I propose we take item 73-23 out of order. Your second for that?
Second.
All in favor of doing that? All right, so consider action relative to amending the municipal fee schedule. You want to explain what this one's about?
So this is something that Peter and I had actually been talking about for a while. Back in the early 2000s, it predates me a little bit, the council during budget season adopted this 2% administrative fee for a performance guarantee. When commercial projects come in and are approved before the project review board, this is practice in a lot of places, but they quite often have a condition that they post a performance guarantee. Their performance guarantee in Freeport is typically cash or a letter of credit, and it's money that a developer puts up front to ensure that they're going to build what they got approval for. It just relates to site work. So, if a project goes south, the developer has ripped up the site, essentially the town can draw on that and go back and repair the site, stabilize, make it safe and all that stuff. We don't typically get into the buildings. It just covers the cost of site improvement. So the cost of projects in early 2000s was a lot different than project costs in 2023. So as time has gone up, we've seen more projects coming in with bigger dollar of site work. That 2% number has gone up quite a bit. As you know, a municipality can have fees for permits, administering different things, but they can't be excessive. They need to reflect the work that goes into them. So there is some work behind the scenes that goes into administering a performance guarantee. A developer will get approval of a project, they'll come in, they'll approach the town about meeting the conditions, you'll have to work with them to set up an escrow to put the money in, or you'll have to work with them in the bank to get a letter of credit established, and then they can do reductions along the way. Some projects are, built out in a year, other projects can be built out over a long period of time. We're bringing this before you today to kind of for a checks and balance to look at our fees and to make sure they're accurately reflecting costs incurred for administering these projects. We've had a couple bigger projects in the last few years. We've had some over $10,000. We've had one that was $55,000. I have a partial fee that's about $160,000, of which $40,000 has been paid. These site work costs are so high now that 2% is going up. So what you have before you tonight is a suggestion from staff that for that existing 2% administrative fee, we put a cap for an amount of $10,000. Anytime a project comes in, if they have it, would calculate the administrative fee, cap it at $10,000. If you have one property and you come in with 10 different projects, then those fees would be treated separate, but for one large project, we do calculate it once. we would suggest this goes to any fees that haven't been paid yet, or, the board's recently approved some projects that they haven't started construction, and they do have a condition regarding the administrative fee. Happy to get into more detail. That might be more than you want, but.
Councilor Bradley.
So let's just take, for example, the big project that you identified that's got this huge fee. Is your calculation of your administrative expenses for that project, as big as it is, are still less than $10,000?
No, so sorry, sorry, I think I said 160, I meant to say 130. So we have a large project underway that's been millions and millions of dollars just in site work. So their 2% administrative fee that they would owe us for overseeing the performance guarantee would be over $131,000.
And that's far in excess of what your actual costs will be to do that work.
Yes.
And $10,000 would cover it if you had it.
Yes, I think $10,000, for a big project that can go over years for the time mostly Adam and myself put into it, would well cover it. And I think realistically, most projects over the years have been under that. So I do feel like it's a safe cap, but for the bigger projects, it's excessive to not have a cap on them.
I'm not quite sure what you're telling me. You're telling me that there are occasionally big projects that might exceed the $10,000, but in the whole scheme of things, 95% of them are under that or more, and so that's a fair amount for the vast bulk of the administration.
Yes, yeah. For a small project, the 2%, a couple $100.
Would it make sense that that there be a provision here that in a large project situation, you could come to the council, or you could discretionarily increase it by another 10% for a project that exceeded, $100 million or whatever it is?
I think it would be, we hear from developers through the visioning, they want to know upfront. They want to know what the clear fees. I think if you want to make it higher, we make it higher, or people can come to you on a case-by-case basis and ask for fee waivers. Staff can't do that, but the council does have that ability.
Councilor Fournier.
I think it needs to be increased. I think we go to a maximum of $20,000, and that gives us hopefully a little bit of buffer as costs continue to rise. They're going to continue to rise the next year, and that, we don't have to deal with this hopefully for maybe 2 or 3 years. But that allows for those huge projects, your cap is there, and we may not have to, put a lot more time in when it's around 10,000. So. Costs are just going through the roof, as we know. So I think, if we doubled it, maybe that will cover some of the costs down the road. We still have a cap.
To clarify, there's a performance guarantee, which is separate than the administrative fee, right?
Right.
So the performance guarantee, we're not changing. That's if we need to go in and remediate something that wasn't done right.
The board has a condition. So a developer comes in, they say, okay, here's all the site improvements I'm doing. I think I gave you the example of $200,000. So they give me a performance guarantee, whether it be $200,000 in cash or a letter of credit for $200,000. And they kind of keep that on the side, we'll say, while they build their project. Because there's costs that go into administering that, working with the applicants, working with the banks, we charge them 2% of that site amount, so 2% of the $200,000. So the performance guarantee, it's the 2% that we're bringing forward with a cap for the council to consider.
And was there reasoning behind the $10,000 number that you're proposing?
We did kind of a history of stuff over time and what we thought went into work. Honestly, for a lot of the bigger projects, they're bigger developers. They don't rely on every penny as much as some of the small businesses and small developers. So if you're doing labor, if you're doing a reduction every month to the bank or for cash, there's more labor involved in it.
Other comments? Councilor Daniele?
Is this fair for smaller developers and everything? Like, rather than 2%, should it be 1%? Like, are you happy with everything?
Yeah, I feel like we can keep it. I feel like it kind of all balances out. I do feel like it works for the smaller projects. It's a reasonable number. It's just as we've gotten into some of these bigger projects, these bigger residential or bigger commercial, where they're just doing site stuff, the costs over the past 5 years, we're just seeing them go up. And again, we need to make sure we keep them at a level that reflects the time and work and administration going into these things.
You have something that you want to add on this, Mr. Arsenault?
Yes, please.
Yeah, go for it.
I support the 2%. I think that's enough. Not saying anything, but, we, as a taxpayer, as a future taxpayer, if they come into town to build a development, they're going to pay a lot in taxes. They've paid a lot in fees. I'm sure Carolyn's got a pretty good history on this, and it's one of those things we're trying to work through to make clear that, Freeport is more on an even playing field with other towns around for development so that we can increase our tax base and do things downtown. So I support the 2%. It's another question, but I think we also need to, I've had people up and down Route 1 complain to me that the town has held on to their initial bond too long. And I think we need to, at some point, address that issue as well. That once all the stuff is done, fight over a handicap parking spot or something like that, which is sort of silly, but, people have $35,000 or $40,000 hanging out there for 3 or 4 years, and they need to get that money back. So, but I support this 2% cap. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. Any questions? Let's discussion. Councilor Daniele.
Is staff okay with the 20,000? Raising that, just, construction costs changing, does make sense to me.
Construction costs.
Yeah,
This is
it's not
administrative.
construction costs, it's really the cost to administer it. So I think, we could say, based off current salaries and current time we're putting in, 10,000 might be the minimum. If you want to put a little bit of buffer in there, I don't know that I have a project currently out there that would exceed the 20,000. Other than I do have that one large project that's paid a portion of theirs. They still have a large number out there.
So let's play devil's advocate. We get very lucky. We have a project that does exceed the 10,000. Then what do?
It's capped at 10,000 and everyone
leave it
goes
at
on
that.
their
Okay.
way. And if
All right.
I'm
All right.
spending half my day working on administering that over a couple of years, I'll come back to you.
I'll give you, I'm not going to fight over that. I'm happy with the 10.
It's up to you guys.
On that note, I think we're up to you, Councilor Fournier, if you want to read the motion.
Certainly. Be it ordered that the municipal fee structure be amended to set a 2% administrative fee maximum of $10,000.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That's everybody, 6-0. Oh, sorry. Councilor Bradley's opposed. So 5-1, motion carries. Thank you. I have another proposed agenda change. Caroline, do you have any issue if I ask to do this one? I know it's a pretty
No,
short one,
actually, I
right?
just almost suggested you took
Yeah.
her in front of me.
Yeah. So we have, if we call your attention to item 76-23, so with apologies to Jessica and the department heads that are sticking around. We have Kelly from Visit Freeport who's here for what I think is a very brief request. So given that she's already been here for 2.5 or an hour and a half or so, does anybody have objection to taking that out of order? If I move that we take item 76-23 out of order, would there be a second for that?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor of taking that item out of order? Any opposed to taking that item out of order? I think that was unanimous. So with that, let's move to item 76-23. And I'll briefly introduce it, but then I'll invite Kelly to come up. The Visit Freeport has created an oyster festival, the main oyster festival, which had its inaugural year last year. And they also run the highly successful Fall Festival. And this year they're asking to use Nathan Nye Street, which is between Starbucks and Mafika and Ben & Jerry's. And since that's town property, they need to come to us to ask for that. So would you like to ask for that? We can consider that request.
Yes, please. Thank you, Councilor Pilch. I'm Kelly Edwards. I'm the Executive Director of Visit Freeport. And like Dan said, we do host a fair number of festivals throughout the year. One of those being the second annual The Maine Oyster Festival, and then the 24th annual Freeport Fall Festival. We've lost some of our sites thanks to some of the construction that's going on around town, which is all very exciting, but we need to think creatively about where we're going to host our events if they're going to continue to expand. So we are requesting, I think it's about 400 feet of Nathan Nye to continue to host these events.
On 2 weekends, 2 separate weekends. Yep.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I did notice in the agenda, I think that for the main Oyster Festival, it did say 3 days, but it's actually 2. It's the 24th and the 25th. And then for the Freeport Fall Festival, that would be October 6th through 8th. We would need 3 days of closure for that. And the plan that we've put forth to you was developed by Community Relations Manager for Visit Freeport. Her name is Margaret Hoffman. I'm sure you noticed she's very thorough. And that was in partnership with Public Safety and Public Works.
And there's letters attached from all the neighboring tenants and landlords and police chief, and so looks like there's a lot of support. I don't see any issues. Does anybody have any questions for Kelly? If not, I'll take this one. Be it ordered that the use of town property request for Visit Freeport for closure of Nathan Nye Street from Main Street approximately 420 feet westerly during the main Oyster Festival, June 24th to June 25th, and Fall Festival, October 6th to October 8th, be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. And thank you, Kelly, to you and to Margaret, Sue, and everybody else at your organization for all you do on behalf of the town. I think it's wonderful. I don't think you get enough credit for it. So thank you to all the people watching the meeting. And hopefully they'll spread the word, and that Visit Freeport is just such a wonderful organization for us. So.
Well, thank you. I always like to say we get to do the fun stuff, so.
It's a very thorough package that made it real easy.
It does,
Thank
yeah, yep. And you're also still seeking volunteers for both festivals?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. We are a full-time staff of 2 and a part-time staff of 1, and for the Fall Festival alone, we have 200 exhibitors, so we could always use a hand managing that many people. That doesn't even count, the visitors that are coming into town, so usually we try to create fun jobs and responsibilities for people who want to donate a little time, so very much appreciated. Thank you for bringing that up.
Awesome. All right, any other discussion? All in favor? Granting the request?
Aye.
Any opposed? That, I believe, is unanimous, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so now back to our regularly scheduled agenda, which would bring us to item 72-23, to consider action relative to adopting the 5-year capital program, which Jessica and the rest of the staff have been so diligently working on, and we've been diligently discussing for several weeks. So, what's the news on our capital program?
You tell me. I didn't know if everybody had a copy, so I went and printed a copy.
So this is the same as what we've seen at the last meeting?
This is the same. I will wait till I get back to the mic to tell you. I have 2 changes from the last time on this. They are both under the, Article 3, which is rescue. One change is the removal of the $30,000 for the AV equipment. And one is the addition of $50,000 for the rescue replacement. We got updated quotes, and I believe they were coming in higher than the initial updated ask of $400,000, and they were coming in closer to $450,000. So we were updating that so that we can actually get one instead of having to come back and ask for more money at a later date. So those are the 2 changes that are reflected from the last meeting. And to kind of summarize everything, if you go to the very last page of what I just handed out, that's kind of everything that's been talked about and reflected from the beginning of this process.
So I'm just looking at what's been posted, I think what's been posted online. Article 3.
It is different than what's online because it has those 2 changes I just mentioned.
Got it.
That should be the only difference that just was resolved within the last week. So that's why it's different online.
So we're adding 50,000, but taking away 30,000.
Correct.
Both in Article 3. So for a net change of 20,000 more than what's listed. Okay.
Correct.
Got it. And then the last page is sort of a history, and that's Look for the difference there, 40, 16, 15, 30. Oh, it's the same two things, I see. The same, adding 50, taking away 30 is on the last page as well.
Correct. And so just to kind of summarize, as it stands, you would be looking at a capital plan of $3,352,000. With a projected $3,028,000 coming from capital reserves at this point, and $324,000 coming from your TIF. Obviously, those funding sources will be tweaked when we get to the point of appropriation. But I point that out because a later agenda item is discussion of what to do with the fund balance that had come to you back in February.
Councilor Fournier.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I got a couple of questions. Number one, this is under the sidewalk for Main Street and east side of Depot Street. We had a discussion, a couple of discussions of putting down hot top as opposed to bricks, and I think this was scheduled for bricks. So my question is, if this gets approved, then are we locked into the bricks? Or do we have an opportunity? There was some suggestions maybe to let Complete Streets maybe take a look at this and maybe come up with some suggestions. I think paying 3 times as much for brick sidewalks outside the main business district is unwise. We can get a lot more work. So I don't know how we address that. Do we let Complete Streets come in and give them a request to be timely maybe before it goes or not? So that was my first question.
This appropriation would not lock you into it being brickwork. It would just be sidewalk repair. We would start with the Park Street, Bow Street to Hilton area, and whether that ends up being a repavement or a rebricking. This doesn't lock you into the material. It just locks you into the project.
Okay, thank you. Then the other one, I've been looking through here, and I can't quite find it. There was $100,000 that was proposed for EV chargers.
Yep, under municipal facilities, Article 7.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I take that back, Article 6, comprehensive town improvements, sorry.
Number 5. So I guess with us looking to go with grants, we really have a large request for capital budgets. I'd like to see that line cut. I don't know if I have any support, but we have a number of EV chargers throughout town. I think we have a lot more needs than to expend $100,000 on that. So I get support, but.
So I'm fine either way, obviously, with whatever council deliberates and decides. But I do want to explain what's before you tonight is adoption of the plan. The appropriation amounts can and will still be changed at the point of appropriation in June. What you're adopting tonight is the 5-year big picture look of these are the projects we want to pursue and prioritize as council for the next 5 years. Year 1 is where we focus on the funding source. And if you look at page 2 of this, so the summary, when we get to the point of appropriation in June, that's when you're going to see the funding source breakout. Like last year when we did the bridge work, you would have, the comprehensive town improvements was $1,050,000 last year. Well, $634,000 of that would have gone under the bond column because we bonded that work and not under the reserve. Does that make sense? So when we get to the point of appropriation, your funding source will change. This is just the adoption of the big plan, and ultimately we need to put what we anticipate the costs of these plans to be into this, because if for some reason the grants fall through or don't come to fruition, or, whatever, and you still want to do the project, you need to know what that cost is going to be. This is just the kind of like a comprehensive plan, right? It's looking at where you want to go and what you want to do as a town for the next 5 years with our capital projects and assets, and when and if the funding changes, like for instance with the EV chargers, we have the 100,000 in there because if there are no grant funds, you may be on the hook for that full amount. If we get to the point of funding and yes, it's going to be 100,000, you don't have to do the project. The funds will revert back to the reserve when you close the project. Does it make sense?
That makes sense, but on the other hand, and I guess this probably goes to the chairman, last year, both the capital and operating budget was passed without the options of coming in to do the finite, either additions or deletions. And as long as I get the promise, we can go in and have these discussions, I'll go with it tonight. But on the other hand, doing capital budgets for 45 years, if there's a council tonight didn't have the will, which I don't think that's going to happen, but to cut the 100,000, then we should let you know, so that's,
For sure.
So you don't have to deal with that.
100% agree. Mm-hmm.
And yet, yes, to answer your question, tonight is the opportunity to make any adjustments we want to the capital program. We'll have a similar opportunity to make adjustments to the capital budget and operating budget. Councilor Bradley.
So we just went through the sewer discussion in detail, and the $100,000 or the additional 60 is not reflected in this capital budget.
Correct.
How do I raise that so that the council can decide either to include it or exclude it?
You can propose it as an amendment, and then we can vote on the amendment, and then when it comes time to vote on the program, it'll be as amended if the amendment passes. So yes,
So should I do that this moment?
go for it.
We have an article? And it would go,
Yeah, say where you want to put it, I suppose.
I assume it goes into the list of proposed changes to the fiscal year capital program, the last page.
Last page, but
You would want to make the motion to include it in one of the articles. The last page is.
Which one?
Well, I feel like it probably would be best served under comprehensive town improvements.
Do we need a motion on the floor to make this?
the amendment is the motion. So his amendment will be the motion, and then that would need a second. And then we can discuss and vote the amendment. Oh, I see what you mean. No, the original,
The budget amendment on the
Yes.
floor to then motion amendments on that.
yes, good point. Counselor Daniele, would you like to read the motion? So that we-
Be it resolved that the proposed 5-year capital program be approved.
Second.
Was there a second?
On the
Okay,
table
yeah,
floor now, so we can make amendments.
okay.
So now,
Okay, thank you, Jake, good point. All right, so now, Ed, if you'd like to amend the motion, let
I
them.
would like to move that the provision of comprehensive town improvements, Article 6, fiscal year 2024, be amended to add the sewer district recommendation of, and I have to admit to some confusion here, Jess, there's $40,000 that I think is in play for the same thing I'm going to amend this for.
Ed, your mic is off.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a $40,000 item somewhere that Dan shepherded, and it's in here somewhere. I don't know where it is.
In the operating budget, not the
It's
capital.
in the operating budget.
Right, right.
All right, then I would like to add an amendment to I'd like to add an amendment to Article 6, Comprehensive Town Improvements, fiscal year 2024, item 9, to add $60,000 for qualified projects that promote the downtown visioning process, including, but not limited to, sewer connection fees.
I'll second that.
Discussion on that $60,000 item.
can we ask our finance director about funds and?
Of course.
We have $60,000.
I have reservations about the amount of the capital plan this year in relation to the reserve balances, solely based on the fact that our funding source of the reserves are not as robust as they've historically been. The later article or the later agenda item that's before you to assist in funding this would go a long way to helping narrow that gap. I think if we're talking short term, I think you have enough to add the 60,000, no problem for year one. And you're delaying the concern of funding a 5-year plan. So my answer is yes and no.
But setting it aside in this plan does not equal spending it
Correct.
or anything like that. And so if the fund does not magically produce anything that we think is good, it would just revert back at the end of the year.
It would revert back to in reserve. So typically the projects revert back to reserves after a 3-year period. So we typically have 3 years to complete. When you think about road work and projects of that scope, we try to give a 3-year window. And when projects are done, whether it be before that or right around by that 3-year mark, if they haven't been spent, we typically revert them back to reserve.
But just to continue the understanding, or my understanding is, putting it into this broad program doesn't appropriate it. We still will then have another decision point coming up at the appropriation moment, at which point there'll be greater clarity about some of these questions as well as other things. And you may decide, we may as a council decide that $60,000 is too much for that purpose and we reduce it or we eliminate it entirely.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is really just to get it into the queue.
Yes. And I mean, we've had items in the capital plan before, to Ed's point, and Courtney is no longer in the room, but, the library building expansion was on the 5-year plan, I think, for 8 years. It stayed within that 3 to 4 year mark because the priority, it needed to be on the radar. The difference with that is that it was in a year 3-4 scenario, which is not funded. Year one, you're looking to make that fund. You're looking to appropriate those funds in whatever capacity that may look like. Then, when and if those do or do not get spent, will determine whether they revert back to reserves, and it's open for other reserve projects, or they're spent and you do the project.
And a council could, in that same year, seeing that it wasn't being applied for or used, vote to revert it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Councilor Daniele?
Go ahead, Matt.
Councilor Pillsbury?
Ed, did the committee have any thoughts as to how much money was going to be needed over what period of time? Because I think that could drive this question as well. I mean, whether or not it's all needed year one, or we split it year 1, 2, 3. I mean, I don't know what the volume of this need might be, and that could help us answer the question.
We have no way to project that. That's the result of the cumulative decisions about the downtown and how it's going to develop, and who is going to see. I mean, some of these big projects don't think connection fees are a problem at all. They just pay them. There are smaller projects, though, that we'd like to see happen, for which a connection fee is a big deal. And those would be, my guess, the kinds of projects that would come forward for this kind of support, because it's not going to be a lot of money. But I don't, the honest answer is not a clue.
Councilor Daniele first, then Councilor Fournier.
Well, mine's backtracking a little bit, which is why I was pushing it back. But in 73-23, we just changed the municipal fee schedule. So, Madam Manager, is that the right way to say it? Madam Manager? I don't know.
Manageress.
I think we made that motion that existing projects that were in queue are going to be reduced down to the 10,000, right? How much money did we just give out with that decision versus making them stay at the current amount or giving them a half break on whatever it was down to the 10,000?
It would really vary on a case-by-case basis. Again, you can't rely on fees for income. They have to correspond to the work or the administration, so you can't rely
Right.
on those fees to be a revenue source?
Yeah, those fees are designed to offset and compensate for the administrative component of those projects. It's kind of like a specialized revenue in that regard versus a fee that we're charging for something different. I
Yeah,
know.
so for example, if I think of like, so, within the past couple years, again, we had that one project that would have had a fee of $131,000. There's another one I can think of that was like $55,000. So they've really been all over the place, but then, if we don't have a lot of projects going on, we could collect zero. So I can't really tell you an easy answer.
I'm only asking about the ones that were existing that we just reduced down, the ones that are in process, or they were already planning on doing it even without us reducing the fee.
Got you. So I can't answer that today because until they come in and start the projects, if they haven't established that cost of site work today, and they're not going to start it for 2 years, would calculate it at that point in time. So I don't have like a running, other than the one where they just paid a portion of the $131,000, I don't have all the other calculations on hand at this point.
Is the 131 going to be reduced down?
The 131, so sometimes when we have big fees, we let developers pay like part at the beginning and part at the end. They had paid about $40,000 already, and so in that case, I would assume that we just wouldn't collect any more money from them. That was the intention of the fee that you just did. Not to retro back, but they have outstanding.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because we're talking about dollars here, and I think recognizing that we just essentially gave somebody who was planning on doing a project with $110,000 worth of admin fee, regardless of what the fee was intended for, they were expecting to pay that. So there's $40,000, that's $70,000 that we just potentially gave out, right?
That's not really a good example, because if you guys didn't take action universally and fix the problem, they would have come to you and asked for a waiver.
That's fair, okay. I'm just wondering if
So
any
no,
of those
they
other
didn't really-
projects could be modified quickly to get money that we would then feel good about adding Councilor Bradley's thing into this, because, money over here versus, what?
Sewer committees?
Well, sure.
Teasing.
Wow, yeah. Anyway, I'll leave it there, somebody else can take over.
Councilor Fournier?
Is there any other areas to make this request through TIFs or something like that? Do we have a TIF in the downtown business district? Do we have a TIF somewhere else? I know we've TIFed additional projects, and would that possibly be eligible? I do not know. That's something that, obviously would have to be researched.
Well, no, that question comes up next when you go to appropriation. Where do you get the $60,000? And it could be from a TIF, doesn't affect the taxpayer at all. It could be from a grant we don't know about yet. It could be $60,000 that we have to pay. But even then, if we don't get the applications for it, it sits there. It doesn't get spent, and it doesn't affect the taxpayer. So there's a lot of stuff coming as I'm beginning to understand this process better that extends the actual spending of money, keeps it out there. You get closer and closer and closer and closer, then you got to do it. But getting closer and closer and closer gives you chances to back away or to change to where you get the sources and affect how it affects the tax base.
In putting this money in, it's listed under the reserve because by default, if nothing else comes forward and you choose to spend those funds, that's where it's going to come from. But it doesn't restrict you to only spending it from reserves, and it doesn't restrict you to have to spend it from reserves. You can, like Ed was saying, you can say no and no longer do it. We can continue to pursue grants. We can continue to look at TIFs and see if there's another use in another TIF for it. We can look to see any bonds, we have alternatives when it gets to the point of actually pursuing the physical execution of the project. This is more just the plan. And the reason it's kind of bleeds gray here is that, you know, you're making a priority to the project and giving staff directive that these are projects that you want to see done and that we'll look to pursue, you know, but at the end of the day, they're going to come back before you for, you know, approval, especially when it comes to these ones like the downtown visioning, you know, like the rescue ambulance, which is obviously a bad one to use because it's going to come back before you, given the value. But, you know, when I'm looking at the public safety building security measures, right, that's, you know, that's in the plan. If you adopt the plan, come July 1, that $16,000 is going to be spent to make the building secure. That's not going to come back before you. It's of a value that it falls within discretion of the department heads and the purchasing agent, which is the town manager, and you know, that's going to move forward. So that's kind of the hybrid balance of this. Ed and I had a discussion earlier this week. As we've progressed through this process, I'm leaning more towards asking council to establish a new reserve. So changing our reserve policy and establishing a new reserve that we create a funding source for, whether it be a one-time tax impact for downtown visioning projects, because that scope is just starting to grow and grow. And the initial intent of this capital plan before you has been for existing capital assets of the town to maintain them, replace them, and not have major tax impacts. And it's worked for over 30+ years here in the town of Freeport. And not to say that it can't continue to work, but you know, perceptions are starting to change and priorities are starting to expand where we want growth, we want more. And that's not necessarily, in the economic climate we have been in, conducive with the existing reserves that are in place. So, you know, there's, you know, I'm going to throw it out there that that's something to be considered, of changing a reserve policy and adding a reserve for, you know, growth mindset.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
It's a hypothetical
I
question.
hope I have an answer for you.
Well, hypothetically, if we came to you in September, after the budgets have been passed and adopted, and we said we have a new program, we want to create a new development fund for whatever, and we think we want to fund it half out of reserves, half out of a TIF, and half out of a grant, but it hasn't been in the budget. If we craft it and figure out a way to fund it, would we have the ability to add that kind of a project mid-year?
If Peter would tell me to tell you yes. I would honestly have to look into the process. There would be a process. There would have to be a supplemental appropriation from an auditing perspective to follow the money source. It wouldn't be as difficult if it's funded primarily through the reserve, because it would just, there's no tax implication with that. If you're talking about also pulling it from general fund operations, we'd have to send out supplemental tax bills, because you're asking for more money, you know, from the taxpayers and stuff like that. So that I would have to get more clarity on the process, to, because I wouldn't want to mislead you that there wouldn't be a tax impact that would have to go out to residents for that when it's mid-year like that. But I feel like I recall it would be more flexible if it was just an appropriation from reserve.
Right, money we already have.
Yeah.
We need a bigger room for the public hearing on that one.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Other discussion on the amendment for $60,000? Seeing none, why don't we go ahead and vote on the amendment, and then we'll continue the discussion on the rest of the capital program. So all in favor of the $60,000 amendment?
Aye.
And I'll vote opposed to that, so that's 5-1, so that motion carries.
Who opposed it?
I did. Councilor Fournier.
I'd like to make a motion to eliminate the $100,000 for EV charges.
Is there a second?
Sure. Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Discussion from anybody?
As I stated earlier, I think Ella Beans has a number of chargers. We are really, we just had an eloquent explanation of we're spending a ton of money here. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but we got to set some important priorities. And in my opinion, at this point, this is not the right time for that. I think this money can be used in some other much-needed applications in the budget.
Got it. Any other comments? Councilor Egan?
I don't disagree at all with the logic, Daryl. I think that it's highly likely that the RFP that our town engineer is putting together is going to fund those installations with grant funds. There may be a very modest copay that the town has to pay for some infrastructure. Next week, we're going to hear about a zero-cost opportunity for us to get a fast charger, a network of them, put in at $0 to the town, and zero operating expense. All we're providing is a parking space. So I think there's opportunities there. I don't ever really expect that there would be a decision point where, I mean, who knows? But I guess let's say in the next 12 to 24 months, I don't see any specific request coming forward where we've exhausted all the grant opportunities and we still want to go spend $100,000 on EV chargers. That said, I understand your reticence to that. There's other items in here that I might feel particular about, but I don't actually think we're ever going to be asked to spend that because of the grant funding that's available.
I guess that's one thing that I'd like to see changed, right? Like some designation that we're putting this in because we want to get grants and because we need to have some mechanism to say we're going to do it. So I hear you. I agree with Councilor Egan that I'm expecting this to be paid with grants, and I don't want to signal to staff, I don't want to have this in here anymore because I want them to keep pursuing that.
Jessica, is there a way to do that in future years where we say, I don't know if it's another column or a different page of the budget, but these are things in the capital program that we expect are priority projects, but we don't expect to use our own money for. We expect to get outside money for that.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly pull, a sidebar list together. But if there's no expectation to expend capital funds, I would not be putting it in a capital plan. But that's not going to mean that it falls off our radar. If council directive is still to pursue grants with EV chargers, that will happen. It just won't be expected to be funded with reserve dollars if no grant comes through, if that makes sense. Unless council does a reappropriation or you know what I mean, an additional appropriation to do so at a future point. Does that make sense?
Councilor Bradley?
I hope this is clarification, but I think we have that process in place.
Yeah.
The one you're talking about. Because what happens is, this is just the broad, it's like the comprehensive plan for spending. Projects that we think are good, but we don't know if we can afford them and we don't know whether we're going to pay for them. And so at the next stages of this, we will define those issues based on what other sources we have of funding and what our appetite is for increasing the tax base to pay for them. So I think it's right here. It's just, it's what I was trying to say earlier. It's an elongated process. We never really do come to the decision about prioritization about spending until we really get to the appropriation moment.
Which is in June,
But on the other hand, if you knew you didn't ever want to spend any money on EV chargers, that was not in your values scheme, this would be a good time to stop it, if that's how you felt.
I have been in municipal government for 45 years, and usually when these items get in the budget, for one way or another, they get spent. So if we're going to have to take and make some decisions here that affects the tax roll, I think there's other important priorities. And if in fact it is going to be funded through a grant, which would be great, then there's $100,000 that is off our plate that we don't have to deal with.
Are you guys looking to talk about EV chargers?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of like the way the discussion's going.
Sorry, you don't?
I said I sort of like the way the discussion is going. That's the reason I came tonight, was to discuss the charges for the EVs. So I have some questions, because I don't remember exactly how much this was to be in the budget, what the dollar amount was.
On the EV charges?
Yeah.
100,000.
100,000. So does that mean that that would come back to the town council because it's 100,000? Or is it 101,000 that brings it back? What's the number that brings it back?
That you have to go out to bond for?
No, that you have to, if it's less than $100,000 in the program, my understanding is, that's it, that's the appropriation. Doesn't have to come back to the council. She just said it's $100,000. So does that mean it does have to come back, or it doesn't have to come back? That's the first question.
So if it ends up being 100,000 or more, it would have to be by ordinance brought back to council for approval. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So basically, my understanding is, if you put this in the program, then that money, if it's less than $100,000, gets spent. You don't even have a say in it. Correct?
Not my son.
No,
You're thinking of going out.
they have a say at this point, at this juncture.
Right now.
Yeah.
And in June as well,
Right,
yes?
right,
And in June. in
right.
appropriate-
That's my point.
And in June at the appropriate, correct.
Right. So you're really appropriating the money right now.
No.
No, we appropriate in June. Tonight's just the plan, and then June will be the appropriation where we say go forth and spend.
But earlier on, there was a $16,000 money mentioned that would be spent automatically.
If it's appropriated in June.
Okay.
Tonight is the overlying plan
Right.
of priority.
Right.
And then the money would be appropriated in June. And at a $16,000 level, if it's appropriated in June, come July 1, we're going to move forward with pursuing that project.
Okay. So that sort of answers my first question. My second question is, and this may have been partially answered, you have on the agenda under other business, a second party sponsoring the level 3 charges. Sponsoring means to me somebody else is going to pay for it, right?
Right, and actually, that item's going to be taken up next week because our agenda was too long this evening for that item to have some feedback from the
If
participants.
somebody else is going to pay for this, why do we include it in the capital program?
It wouldn't be in the capital program.
Well, it's in the capital program right now, right?
Two different chargers.
No, it's two different projects.
It's two different projects. Okay, so what's the first project?
The first project would be the town is, well, it's my understanding, Caroline can correct me, the town is pursuing a grant opportunity through Efficiency Maine Trust, which is funneling some grant funding to promote municipal EV chargers, to promote more opportunities for EV charge opportunities. So the grant would pay, and I don't know exactly what the amount is, but a substantial, if not nearly all, of the cost of those level 2 chargers, which are similar to the ones that are in the parking lot behind LL Bean, not the Tesla, but the other ones. The grant would pay for most of that, and I don't have that document in front of me. There may be a very modest copay that the town or the municipality has to contribute to get the infrastructure in there, which is why we're trying to really focus on the right place so that that infrastructure cost is minimized. That's the quote EV charger program. The placeholder here is so that there is funding available if the town wants to do that plus more. And I guess that was my comment earlier. I don't ever expect that we're going to spend anywhere near $100,000 to put in the scope of proposed EV chargers that the grant is going to be applying for. The item that's on the agenda tonight at the end of the meeting is going to be postponed to next week. is for a separate installation by a third-party vendor at their cost, with their meter, with their operating expense, and all the town is doing is allowing it to happen on a public parking spot.
I guess my opinion would be, if that's the case, with the third party paying for it all, another good reason to take this out of the capital program. Take it out. Why do we want to pay for somebody else's fuel? And that's really what it's come down to. You go up to LL Beans, right? And LL Beans pays for your free charge.
Right, the chargers, there's two different kinds of chargers. The level 2, which is proposed and that the town engineer is working on, those would have a key swipe. There would be no subsidizing from the town's electricity bill. The user would have to pay for the electricity.
Okay.
Yeah, Andrew Arsenal, I'd like to address the same issue of EV chargers. I've made 4 or 5 passes around Beans parking lot, talked to some customers. There's 8 spaces up there, 8 Teslas. I guess you pay for the other ones are free. Talked to a couple people there charging, and they said we come here because it's free. Some of the Tesla people evidently plug into the free ones because they don't want to bother with the Tesla ones because they have to pay for those, I guess. My concern is, as a taxpayer, I guess, more than anything, I don't understand why the town is getting into the business of supplying a fuel depot for transportation for private individuals that purchase and buy a car. I have a gasoline-fired car. I have to go to a gasoline station to fuel it. That's a private enterprise deal. I don't understand where the town has made the decision that all of a sudden, because it's an EV car, electric vehicle, that the town now has to supply them, the taxpayer, because that is us, will supply them with a place to charge their vehicle. This is crossing the barrier between private and public enterprise. It's not the public, it's not the government's role to charge or supply places for people to charge their vehicle. I just don't think that's our role as a government, as a tax collector, where it only benefits a few people in town. You fix the road, it benefits everybody in town. It's a public right of way. We build a school, it benefits everybody in town because those kids get educated. Whether you have kids or not, the kids in town are educated. We plow the roads, that's a benefit to everybody in town. Having an EV charging station on the taxpayer's budget is basically crossing the barrier. What's going to go next? EV parking garages? How come you don't have a gas station for me? I mean, I get gas. If this guy wants to come, third-party guy, and put in an EV charging station, he should buy a piece of land somewhere or buy a parking space or do something and put up his business. This is really crossing the barrier, and I don't think we've had this discussion yet of why we are using tax dollars, even if it's $20,000 out of this $100,000. We are now crossing the barrier between providing a service for one section so that private individuals can fuel their car. That's never happened before. And I think we need to have that discussion before we put either public spaces. What happens if the car catches on fire? It's in a public space. Darrell can tell you, any fireman can tell you, it's pretty hard to put out an EV car on the side of the road. You're there for hours. They can't be towed to a garage because there's rules. They have to be everything has to be 60 feet away from the car when it's on fire or crashed. The body shops don't want them in when they get wrecked because they catch on fire in the middle of the night. So I think before we go down this road, I think the council owes me one, but I think the taxpayers in general, why you are funding EV stations for private individuals. If we had EV, if Nate and Conley over there had electric vehicles, I could see. Have a plug-in for them down at the fire barn or out front out here or something like that. But for us to provide the public with this service, I think we've crossed the line. So, thank you.
Councilor Bradley.
Yeah, Andy, I get the question, and, the same question comes up in the context of funding the sewer district, because not all the taxpayers use the sewer. With respect to the EV charger, I don't want to say the horse is out of the barn, because you can raise it anytime you want. But as we went through the downtown visioning process, EV chargers were identified, I think, as a magnet for bringing people to this community to stay here longer, which is what we were trying to do. So it's consistent with, and correct me anybody who says that doesn't remember it this way, but it was all part of that downtown visioning process. You were sitting in this room when all of that was going on, and you were saying positive things about a lot of the things that were in the...
I did. I didn't hear anything about EV charging stations.
Oh, it was in there. I mean, I heard about it all the time. Now,
Well, then maybe some of these stores that are going to build in the downtown district should provide an EV charging station, just like LL Bean does for their customers, or for everybody.
But my only point to you is this isn't coming up for the first time, nor should the fact that it's coming up now for your first view keep you from talking about it. But I do want to, for the purpose of the audience, if there's anybody out there, or the people who have watched the downtown and have been participating in it, to defend them in the sense that they have raised this and discussed it, and it's reached the charter level through a couple of very significant committees in this town, including Freeport Can, the Sustainability Committee, who are promoting this particular project. In this room, it's just you and Kenny, which are voices that I respect deeply, as you know. But on the other hand, there are a lot of other voices that have spoken to this and brought this issue into a priority position. So it's not like we're doing it sort of
So do I get a tax rebate because I have a gas-fired car and the town is fueling electric cars?
We could talk about subsidization of fossil fuels until we both disagree.
Yeah, but we don't in this town. We don't in this town. The taxpayer in this town does not.
I do. I give a lot of my tax dollars to fund your gas car by supporting, through tax subsidies, the fossil fuel industry. And that isn't direct tax payment from my property tax. It comes right out of my pocket. I'm paying much more to support your car than you are supporting my electricity. And that I really shouldn't have said that because I don't know that. I don't know the calculation. But we are both subsidized. Both systems get subsidized to some extent. So that border.
Not at the local level.
Maybe not at the local level. But anyway, I don't want to turn it into a debate. I did want to say, though, it's more balanced than you made it sound. And that's all I wanted to say. And I think it's a
If you guys want to apply for a grant and find some place to put it on private property, that's fine.
I understand.
That's fine. I mean, I'm all for getting grants, and if somebody wants to get a grant, I think we could have better used the $55,000 instead of fixing the steps out front, put in an EV station somewhere. There's nothing wrong with these steps out front. You know, so go do a charging station, get somebody down back to say, we'll sponsor it. You know, fine. But I just have concerns, what road we're going down here, and
Fair enough.
keep piling on, So, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, council? So we have an amendment on the floor to remove the EV charging item from the capital program. There's no other discussion. I'll call for a vote on whether or not to Councilor Egan, you have a question?
I'm wondering, Darrell, if you would consider cutting it in half as opposed to removing it.
Let's call for a vote, and then we'll discuss later.
Yeah, okay.
I think we've got more.
Okay, so if no other discussion, the motion on the floor is the amendment to remove the $100,000 completely. So all in favor of removing the $100,000?
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
The motion fails on a 1-5 vote with Councilor Fournier in support.
I've got one
You got one more? Go for it.
And I think maybe in 2023, Jessica, under the municipal facilities, I see item 7, we did, not item 7, where is a fire digitizer? Is that for the fire department, I believe?
The what, I'm sorry?
Number 7, I think it says file digitizer.
Digitalization of our files, yes.
Oh, this is your files. It's not the digitizer at the fire station. It's terminology that's got
Yes.
me. Okay, never mind. I'm all set. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Fournier. Any other changes, amendments? The capital
Point
program?
out that I think we're all in agreement, though, that number, that 100,000 could be lower, so, or some people seem to be in agreement.
We'll deal with it in appropriations.
Well, that's kind of how I've been feeling, but I think that it will happen,
Yep.
whether now or later.
Yep, yep, for sure.
Hey, I've been outvoted before, so don't worry, guys, I'm used to it.
All right. Any other questions on the capital program in general? You have something new?
Could I, yes, one new question.
Yeah.
Now, I heard Council Fornia, I think it was last year, is there going to be a way to line item the budget come June, or is it going to be an up and down vote on the whole thing?
Be the same process, so there'll be an opportunity
What
to
is that?
amend. So there'll be the budget that will be presented, and then we'll have the opportunity to make amendments just like we're doing tonight.
Is that what we did last year?
No, I think we've corrected it, so.
Okay, so this year you'll be able to amend the budget.
We're going now, so that way, we have a little more input.
Thank you.
Longer meetings, but more input, so I appreciate that.
Yep. Any other questions, discussion on the capital program as a whole? That'll be our next vote to adopt the whole program. So,
Are you, overview?
adopting, or what's the language? Or adopting the proposed capital program as amended with the additional $60,000. Question?
Not a question,
Or
just
comment?
it's sort of a comment.
Go for it.
First, I want to thank everybody who's sort of taken the time to educate me to how the budget process really works. I mean, I've been on the council before, and I frankly didn't have a clue. And so, as we went through the downtown visioning projects, my concern has always been process. It's been, at what moment do you prioritize one versus another, and how do you balance it with the impact on the taxpayer? And I couldn't see ever the point at which that happened. So I had the feeling that we were just moving these projects down based on the benefits that we all felt they would produce, and we all felt a lot of them had good benefits. But in the context of the sewer discussion, I really started to get it. And so I'm just going to say what I got, and I don't care whether you don't need to comment on it or not. But what I did was I sat down with Jess, and she gave me a list of, and this will be approximate, of the downtown visioning projects that are currently included in the capital budget program for the next 5 years. And it runs roughly to $2,725,000. And that means, in one way, that the taxpayer is going to be looking at $2,725,000 potentially. But before that number becomes real, a number of other steps occur in the process. One, we look for other sources of revenue other than the tax base, and we adjust those capital items by that. And then we look finally at whether or not, when we get to the number that we have to appropriate, we look at what impact that will have on the tax rate, and we make a decision about whether we can afford, from a taxpayer perspective, to spend all that money, and whether we want to. And if we don't, then we take things out or adjust the budget in that way. So this is just, as Jess has said a couple times, the capital program. It's like the comprehensive plan for spending for the next 5 years. The specific decisions that lead to an appropriation and then the application of funds that affect the tax rate are still ahead of us. And we'll make those decisions when we have more information about other sources, whether it's TIF, whether it's grants, whether it's what things actually cost, whether other people are going to do it, and what the real cost of a project is. And I'm comfortable in that respect voting for this budget, because it does contain the things that I think I could get behind if we could answer the other questions. So that's my long-winded way of saying I like the budget as it's been developed. I appreciate the process, and I'm probably going to say this 10 times before this is over, but I'm sort of getting an understanding of what the process really is for prioritization, and it's really a balancing process that requires lots of information to be developed and applied at different times in the process. Now, I didn't see that in the beginning. I didn't, so I was always nervous and antsy and asking questions that seemed negative. I'll probably stop doing that and give a lot of credit to leadership for taking us this far.
So I'll note for the record, Councilor Bradley appreciates the process. Quote you directly on that.
I'll take that.
Any other questions before we vote? All right, all in favor of the motion to to approve the proposed 5-year capital program?
As amended.
As amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
So that passes on a 5-1 vote with Councilor Fournier opposed. Okay, thank you, Jessica.
Thank
and
you.
Everybody else who had a hand in that budget capital program. So we have a few more things on our agenda. I think some of them are short.
Very short.
Some are not. Item 74-23 is regarding renewing short-term rental registrations for the following year, and I think we have an update from our town clerk. This is I guess we're going into the third year of this program?
It was effective July 1st, 2021.
2021.
So just the annual renewal process has been completed. We had 64 renewals. We had 4 people that have opted out and have chosen not to renew. We had 5 short-term rentals that had to pay the $200 late fee. We had 0 complaints registered with code enforcement. And we have so far to date 4 new short-term rentals for 2023.
You have 4 what?
4 new ones.
4 opted out and you got 4 new ones?
Yep. Any questions or concerns?
So the way we wrote the ordinance, we said we wanted to see this every year so we could have a chance to kind of review the program, make sure that it's okay. Councilor Egan?
Chris, do you have any sense of the geographic distribution of the registrations? Are they all over town? Are they sort of in one area, or obviously not in another area, or is it just everywhere?
Do you know what? I'll have to report back to you because I really have not placed them on a map around town, but mostly water views.
I think the reason I'm asking is that there was concern initially when we were considering the registration on one particular side of an issue was the concentration in my neighborhood of short-term rentals. Not me, but that was somebody saying that. And so I was just wondering if we have the ability to take the addresses and spray it onto a map, and so we can just see where they are.
We
You know,
can
if they're all
easily
in-
do that for you.
If they're all in one area, then, maybe we'd have a different conversation.
All right, that's something I can look into for you.
What's the cap again for that?
300.
Oh, we got ways to go.
Yeah, we have, what was
build
it?
some more water.
100 and, do you know what the total is, Chris? 150 or so?
We're issuing,
Or,
we're
sorry.
issuing like 90 is our next issuance number. So we've had some that didn't renew last year, some that didn't renew this year, so, but 64 active.
All right, any questions, discussion? Councilor Pillsbury, I think I skipped you before. Can I come back to you for this one?
That sounds great to me. Be it ordered that short-term rental registration renewals for 2023 be approved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0, that carries. Next up, are we taking this one up tonight to waive the fee?
Well, yeah, I guess, I know we had tried to get some tangible information on this one, but there, I don't know if you want to read the item and then.
Yeah, so this is item 75-23, which is regarding the potential waiver of a late fee for a short-term rental registration renewal.
So this was a particular property owner resident who had previously complied with and met the registration requirements for a short-term rental in their property. In 2022, they reached out to a number of the folks that are working with asylum seekers in the hotels, and they actually housed a family in their short-term rental for a calendar year or more, and to help out with the housing crunch with those families. And so when it came time for their renewal, their short-term rental resident was a year-round resident. And so they were advised that they didn't necessarily need to have a renewal if it was a year-round rental. Shortly after that, that family found permanent housing, and when the resident, the building owner, came back in, they had missed the deadline, and were advised that there was a late fee to re-register their short-term rental. So I'm suggesting personally, because I know the homeowner, that we consider waiving that fee, because they were trying to do the right thing by housing a family that was homeless for a year in their short-term rental, and that just didn't line up with the calendar. So it just seems like that's an unfortunate catch between the rules of what we have going. I think otherwise that that property has not had any issues with its registration, at least that's as far as I'm aware. Yeah.
Counselor Daniele?
Can a new registrant register at any time? Let's say I just go and buy a property tomorrow and I decide I want to do this. Could they register?
I believe so.
So if this one was out of commission for a year, it does seem like if they could prove that they did not take the minimum number of short-term rentals last year, to me, that might be something to add in, that all you have to do is show, nope, I list on Airbnb, you can see I had.
Oh, within our
30
registration rules, yeah.
Yeah, I had 30 before in 2021, and then in 2022, I had none, which means I'm a new registrant and I'm starting again.
Yeah.
I am in favor of granting this and also making a quick change to fix that.
Could they register as a new
After, if they've been
registration?
expired for 1
Could you
year.
go to the podium? Sorry. Or you can bring the microphone with you, so you don't have to keep going back and forth. Get a longer walk from this side of the room now.
Yeah. So the way our ordinance reads is if they're expired for 1 year, then they would apply as a new registration.
So that, yeah, so.
But because in 2022, even though they didn't have any short-term rentals, they took out a permit, is what I'm assuming.
So in 2022, they were short-term rentaling. I think during that registration period, they switched over to rental. So they didn't qualify for short-term rental. If you're doing long-term renting, you don't even fall into the short-term rental. So when that person tried to renew, we're like, you don't, there was,
Late fee?
pardon?
Cost of the late fee?
$200. And then they still pay the $100 permit fee, so it's $300.
Do you want to read the motion? Sure. We'll see if we get support for it.
Oh, actually, yeah, me?
Yeah, go for it.
Be it ordered that the late fee be waived for a short-term rental registration renewal located at 136 South Freeport Road. Be approved.
Second.
Be waived.
This is kind of weird. Counselor Daniele in a second, thank you. Any other discussion on this one? Nope, so all in favor of waiving the renewal, the late fee?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0, that passes as well. Okay, the next item we've already dealt with, so we're ahead on that one. We're up to item 77-23, which brings our finance director back to talk to us about transferring the excess fund balance to capital reserves. Sorry, this is our town treasurer talking to us now, not our finance director.
Yeah, so I'm back before you. I came before you at the end of February asking to transfer some funds to our capital reserves that were deemed excess fund balance from our prior financial audit. And the request or the response at the time was to hold off for processing, and I'm assuming and thinking about what you wanted to do. I'm coming back before you because, this almost $2 million has been sitting in cash because I need to keep it liquid in order to be able to move it. And if we're not going to move it, I just assume put it into an investment vehicle that might actually earn some money for the town. So I'm before you to ask once again if we can transfer this $2 million into the capital reserves as recommended. And I can read that again if you would like, or thanks.
Yeah, so it's in your memo here on page 2.
It is.
Yeah. Councilor Egan.
Jessica, could you characterize very briefly and without a lot of exact detail, which I know is difficult because you like to have exact detail, but the size of the surplus this year, the 1.9, is that an outlier number, or is that somewhat in line with what we see for fund balance excess that we commit back to reserves? I'm having trouble remembering it. I've been doing this 7 years or so, but.
Yeah. Historically, it has not been this large. The last couple of years, it's been in the ballpark of this amount, primarily because I continually try to be conservative with my revenue numbers. One of the biggest changes with this year's amount is that the revenue sharing went to its full 5%. That initially was not projected when it was due to budget time. And we get those projected numbers from the state. So that initially wasn't part of that. And so when they went to 5%, that drastically increased what I was already being conservative on in my budget. So that's probably the largest component to this being 1.9 million. In addition, I mean, you have department heads that understood the economic climate that we were in and doing their best to minimize their ask, you know, and in some cases to the detriment of what we need going forward, right? Because we end up with a $3.2 million capital plan. But it's still, I have to give them credit that they are as frugal as they can be with their day-to-day spending.
So I did some, thank you for that, and I wanted to have that come out, that it's a combination of new revenue from the state as well as expert budget management and being conservative on the estimates up front. I added up the reserve balances that at least are in this capital plan document, and it's over $8 million. And so would the 1.9 would be added to that?
It would be added to.
Okay, so just to point out that we'd be having, that would be over $10 million while we're contemplating the gravity of a $3.3 million capital budget. It is in the context of having $10 million in reserves.
In my 9 years here, this is only the second year we've had a $3 million plus capital plan. It is usually, historically, has been around 1.2, 1.5 million. So I don't want to give the impression that this is a normal capital year. You know, and department heads, when they come to me with their capital requests, I'm like, the last time we had a $3 million year, I was like, don't come to me with another $3 million year. We need a few years to recover. And unfortunately, with this economic climate, we've just needed more years to recover because the rates were just not there. We're rebounding. Ed, I think you'll be pleased to know that I've had conversations with our investment advisors, as well as primarily where we keep our overnight funds. And I think we're going to see a great return, a marketable return on our overnight funds, which will drastically help at least the general fund side of things. And we'll slowly start to see that on the reserve side because the CDs are renewing and we're getting better rates on those, you know, finally as they come around. So. Yeah, but this right now, what I'm asking here, this 2 million, is currently sitting in cash with our investment advisor so that we can actually do something with it. So this will allow us to put it into those higher, you know, returns in vehicles. So.
And would it be correct to say that? Sorry, Mike. Would it be correct to say that if somehow the $10 million went to $13 million? We wouldn't lose this $2 million that we could still access it to fund whatever unexpected, unanticipated, unplanned expenses. So
you could pull back from reserves.
So it's just getting better rates for our money.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have something else?
Yeah, just my last question, I guess, is you outline in the memo the requirements for sort of what's the trigger before fund balance is considered excess fund balance, and it's 1.5 months of operation?
1.5 months of operation.
1.5 months of operation, and then there's something else in there too, right?
We're allowed an additional 5% over that.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. So from knowing your expert and conservative budgeting approaches, do you feel like that is an adequate threshold? Something is triggered as excess fund balance.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that because what you see here is only like a quarter of my spreadsheet, right? When I talk about what amount fund balance exceeds the maximum. I actually have a few other analysis because the best practice used to be 1.5 months. It's now 2 months is best practice. We have not updated our policy. I've mentioned it here or there over the last couple of years, and the temperament really hasn't been there, and we've been doing fine. So I wasn't really pushing it, but I do have additional analysis because sometimes it's like 25% of your expenses, or it's 2 months worth of your, total operating budget. And in our case, we have 1.5%. If I had an ideal, I would say 2% is where my comfort would be. I mean, when you think about it, I'm sorry?
2 months. Not
2 months,
2%.
sorry. I did say 2 months. And I say that because at a minimum, right now, we pay $1.8 million a month to the school. So, when you look at 1.5 months, you have almost, $2.5 million right out of the gate that is going to go right to the school to cover that obligation. And, 1.5 to 2 months, it's really not a drastic difference, but we're doing fine at 1.5%. It's not on my short-term radar to bring before you to change, but.
Okay. I asked that because I'm remembering several years ago when our network got hacked and there was a panic and a scare about, are we going to have to pay, quote unquote, ransom to get the public information back before it spilled out, taxpayer information going out onto the internet, blah, blah, blah. So that was one of those things that just triggered when sort of while we're focusing on how conservative is conservative, there are things that happen out there that are, good offsets about why you want to have that kind of reserve so that we can keep paying the school and keep paying the police and fire department if we had no access to, various pots of funding because of bad actors. So, great, thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Fournier?
We're up to $10 million, but we got some significant expenditures over the horizon. We're looking at a ladder truck that's going to probably be 1.6 to 1.8. We just saw that the rescues now have gone from what we used to get them for $300,000 to $450,000. So that doesn't make me any more comfortable. And this is my pet peeve, and Jessica knows that. But so we got to take a serious look at number one, what's going into the capital, and I, for one, would like to see us get back to what the true capital budget was that we fought, that worked well for 30 years, and we've kind of gotten sidetracked on that, and we've added a ton of money to it. So another night for discussion, but I'll just leave it at that.
Any other questions for Jessica about transferring money to capital reserves? I've kind of lost track of where we are, but Councilor Daniele, do you want to read this one, 77-23?
Be it ordered that the transfer of excess fund balance to capital reserves as recommended by the town treasurer be approved.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Bradley. Any other discussion or questions on this? All in favor of the transfer?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6-0.
Thank you.
Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Very thorough memo.
Yes. And another very thorough memo that you'll be back to talk about in another few minutes. But before we get to that, we have item 78-23. This is about potential action for acting on the RFPs that we got for town manager recruitment. So we put out the RFP. We got 5 responses. I'm prepared to kind of propose one tonight. We can either act on that and say, yeah, let's get the ball rolling. If we have questions, we can go back and vote on this next week if people aren't comfortable. In the memo that you have on the last page, you'll see there's 5, the 5 firms that responded. One local firm that was $10,000 that had a slightly different scope of services. They didn't do as many things as the others. The other 4 were almost all exactly the same. They're all in the basically $27,000 ballpark. When we talked as a council, I think the sentiment was to go cast a wider net, go with a national firm, try and recruit from a national pool of candidates. So that kind of puts us more in the $27,000 range rather than the $10,000 range. Of the 4 that were there, Caroline and Judy did some research, some comparisons, made some calls to sort of check references from other towns that have used, I think all 4 of these, or 3 of the 4 anyway, and got back mostly positive responses, I think, a couple of warnings here and there, but nothing that would cause us to disqualify any of them. So honestly, I think I would say 3 of the 4 would probably be fine choices. My recommendation would be to go with Baker Tilly, which is the 5th one. They sent us a really nice, well-thought-through proposal. It's a little sort of glossier and fancier than the others, which I don't put a whole lot of weight into, except that that's the quality of the material that I think they'll be sending out to candidates, so I think it is significant to look at it. They are currently working the town manager or city manager process in Portland. So we did talk to the folks in Portland to say, how's that going? And received, again, mostly positive feedback from that. Portland is also using, I want to say, GovHR for their police chief recruitment. Also had good experiences with them. So that'd be what again, very close. I think there are a lot of good choices here. I would move that we go with Baker Tilly, but happy to answer questions or point questions to Caroline.
Are those proposals available to us?
They are.
I think they were emailed, and Judy's had them on standby. We can pass them down if you want to look at them.
Yep. And there should be, you should have digital copies as well. Councilor Fournier.
I had opportunity to review them also. I'm not sure I agree with that one. I like your number 2 choice, and the reason I like GovHR really, I think, initially the group that worked at that used to be through ICMA. ICMA initially was a group that was formatted many years ago for city managers, so they kind of grew out of that. And I, through my years, sat on a couple of panels where they were interviewing for fire chiefs, and I used them, and I thought they were excellent. So I've had experience with them. I think that they are, and that's probably the only reason I'm saying I think they would do a great job, but I think they've done both large and small applications for hiring, and I'm not really familiar with Baker Tilly, but maybe they're great, but I just from my experience, I know that's a reputable company.
So nothing negative about the others, more just that's
Nothing
the one you have
negative,
experience
just,
with.
I have a comfort feeling, I know they'll do a great job with that.
Councilor Egan.
Unrelated to an HR search, in my day job, I sit on a bank advisory committee, and the bank uses Baker Tilly for advice and consulting on a very technical finance program called the New Market Tax Credit. And so as an advisory member to the board of the bank, I get a lot of interface with their consultant who runs their compliance and helps with understanding the deal structure and the rules of that program. Again, nothing to do with HR, but they've always come across as a very solid firm. So I have no experience with the others, other than I know the person at Eaton Peabody, or one of the people at Eaton Peabody who does this is former town manager in Brunswick, Don Garish.
Other questions, comments? You guys okay if I propose somebody to act on tonight and get going? Or do you want more time to look at this? Sensing, go ahead, Darrell.
What if we give you, I'd like to get it moving forward, so I'm comfortable with either one of those 2. So I'm wondering if we give you the mechanism to choose one of the 2.
What I would do is I would propose Baker Tilly and then see if there's enough people to vote for that.
Perfect. Yeah, let's get it done.
All right. So I'll make the motion. Be it ordered that a proposal from Baker Tilly in the amount of $26,950 be selected to conduct the town manager search for the town of Freeport, and be it further ordered that the interim town manager be authorized to sign a contract for the services.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any other comments? All in favor of Baker Tilly? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any opposed? So I think that's 6 to
Just
0.
through investigation of the options.
Okay, we are on our last action item of the night, item 79-23 regarding the RSU 5 budget validation election warrant, which the town clerk is going to tell us about. And then we have what's going to be one other business item and then an executive session as well. So, sorry to get you all excited there.
Not much to update you on. So in order to call the school election, they provide the warrant, you have to countersign it, and then I'll hold the RSU budget election June 6th. But keep your eye out for the budget meeting in May, because that's where the dollar values are set, so.
Which I believe this year might be in Durham, if I remember right.
It's at the Durham school,
The
yep.
budget meeting, but the election, of course, will be here in Freeport.
It's either, yeah, I'm not sure the date, so I don't want to say it. It's either the 24th or 25th.
Okay. Any questions for the clerk about the election? Counselor Bradley, can I pick on you for this one? Item 79-23.
To consider action relative to signing the RSU 5 budget validation election warrant for June 13, 2023, be it ordered that the RSU 5 budget validation election warrant for June 13, 2023 be signed.
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Daniele. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 6 to 0. We have passed that item, which brings us to the end of our action items and into our other business item, of which we only have one, since we are going to take up item number 2 next week instead. Counselor Fournier.
I have one quick one. The pet peeve, it may be for the acting manager to look at. We still have a couple of fire hydrants that have been out of service in town for over a year. We normally pay, I believe the hydrant rental right now is $360 per hydrant per month. So all I want to do is get a little credit back from those hydrants that haven't worked. And I think the fire chief has a list of the hydrants that have been out of service. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Fournier.
Was that Maine Water that has them down?
Yeah, Maine Water is responsible for the maintenance of the hydrants, and maybe they get shortage or whatever, but I don't think we should pay for stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Can I interrupt, Jessica? It's like the third time tonight I keep jumping the gun on your agenda items, but we never get to it at the end. But we have at the end of our agenda this list of outstanding or upcoming action items, which have carried over for a while. And I just want to make sure that we're all okay with the ones that are on here. I would propose removing number 2, which has my name next to it, only because we can't really do a tour as a group without calling a public meeting. So any of us can contact Earl or any of the chiefs and say we can go and tour the facilities, which I think is a great idea. I've done it with the police and fire station, but I haven't yet been to Public Works. But I can't do it on behalf of the council and schedule us all to do it at the same time. So that's why I would suggest removing it from this list unless anybody has an objection. All right. And the Councilor Pillsbury, do you still want to take on the reviewing the town fee schedule, or is that something?
That was me foolishly opening my mouth. I do think that there's value to it, but I don't know. I'd like to have a discussion as to the mechanism of how we do it. I think there's also some value in how we look at the budget from a council perspective and work with Jessica, and maybe there's just a different way of us tackling this and some other things. So for the time being, let's leave it, but I'm open to some suggestions around that. That's all I'll say.
Okay. And Councilors Fournier and Bradley, you guys are still want to looking into a new fire rescue substation, District 2? Leave that on the list?
We are.
Okay, good enough. That's all I needed. Thank you. Okay, Jessica, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. And we're all good with 79. I was setting up, so I didn't hear the vote, so I just wanted to make sure.
We're all done.
All right, so I have to present before you the Town of Freeport proposed operating budget for FY '24. Oh, crap. I'll get there. Okay, so for FY '24, we are looking at a total tax of $29,426,987,000, which would be an 85-cent projected mill rate impact at our current valuation. The municipal component of that is $970,360 change over FY '23, or 17.05%. I'm going to go through all of them as we go, but I will focus on the municipal portion right now. So from a budget side, from an expenditure side, we have a requested impact of $1,254,060 increase over FY '23. The major drivers of this are as follows. We have 3 additional staff positions and their associated benefit impact totaling $233,000, and that includes a shared PD patrol / marine officer position. It includes a communications position that council has been asking, and one library part-time position. In addition, there are increased wages of $203,000, and that encompasses our pay scale step increases and changes, contractual wage changes through your union contracts, and transfer of the net wages that used to fall under your net enterprise fund have now been transitioned over to the general fund. And the associated benefit costs with those wages of $282,500. And again, that's it's kind of a hybrid what makes up this benefit increase. There is a 4.6% increase in our health insurance premium over calendar 2022. But it's also more staff are being covered because we have more full-time positions that have been added over this 2-year period, okay? There's also proposed COLA adjustments of $279,000. And then we moved down pretty quick. There's $40,000 in the operating budget for the downtown visioning program and projects for council to match or use as they deem. I've increased paving only by $25,000. Last year I had asked about increasing it by $100,000, and we opted to use ARPA funds instead of increasing the operating budget. So this year I'm asking for $25,000 because I didn't want to come to you with a 30% increase in the operating budget. There's also $52,000 in here for regionalized services, which include use of FCS for general assistance, use of Brunswick for dispatch and animal control officer services, and the Conservation Commission is asking to bring in the Marine Conservation Corp for labor and work amongst our parks, I guess. That's what I'll call it. There's also miscellaneous cost increases of $139,000 that include hydrant rental fees, our IT and cybersecurity network, as well as our Buston's Island appropriation. And those are our major expenditure increases over FY23. My next slide moves into revenues. Revenues increasing by $283,700. And those major drivers are the homestead. There's changes at the state level that increase that value or reimbursement rate, as well as the number of homestead parcels that we have. We've been very active and diligent as people come in. If we see that they do not have the homestead, we're actively handing out applications. So there's been an increase in that. I'm also increasing the interest income. As I discussed earlier, those rates are going up, and projecting $125,000 that we can add for interest income. And then revenue sharing has a slightly minor increase of $50,000 over the state projection. So those are the major revenue drivers, which leave us with the municipal tax rate impact netting to $970,360, or that 17.05%. Our current FY23 mill rate for the municipal component is $2.95. The FY24 proposed would end up being $3.39 if valuation stayed the same. So.
You don't know what the school projections rate is yet, do you?
The school projection, yes. So back, let me see if I can bring that back up for you. So the school is projected at $21,239,560, which is a 33.45 cent increase, or 3.54%. The levy value, dollar value being $726,215. The county the county increase is $147,790. A big chunk of that is related to the 6-month budget. So we received notice last year that they're moving to a fiscal year versus calendar year appropriation, so we need to account for a 6-month budget. Freeport opted to do that over a 5-year span. So this is year 1 of that. We'll see an increased county budget for the next 5 years versus all in one, which works well. And then the Metro Transit service is increasing $2,930, or 3.4%. So let me get back to this slide. So these items that I'm going to read to you are for your consideration. They are not part of the proposal in front of you, but I'm listing them here for your consideration of inclusion into the budget. Fire Rescue had asked for an additional medic position. The budget impact would be $95,700. Buildings and grounds, we have some restructuring going on within that department. It was initially asked to have the library be cleaned and maintained through a cleaning service. Town Hall currently is maintained by a cleaning service. The library is a much larger facility, and that would come at a cost of $60,000. That is, again, not currently in this budget. The town engineer is looking to contract out downtown visioning projects, and a light estimate of $30,000 to bring someone in to handle those projects is not included. The library actually asked for 2 part-time staff positions, so this is the request for the second part-time staffer. And I've included 5 human service agency requests that came in. Within the FY24 budget, the only outside agency requests that are in it were ones that one, received a request for this year, and 2, they were given an appropriation last year. So these 5 that are on this list either did not have they did not have an appropriation last year in the operating budget, and it would take council action to add it in for this current year. To give you a little background on the outside agencies requests, in FY23, we appropriated $53,800, and that was across 9 agencies. We had 15 agencies request this year for $113,600. So it was nearly doubled our request from FY23. So that is why any new ones are on this list for your consideration. And to end my presentation is just to give you an overview of the schedule from tonight forward. May 2nd will be the start of our budget workshops. So on your regular council meeting on May 2nd, we'll have a budget workshop with department heads. May 10th, department heads will meet with any members of the public that would like to come and hear informally more about what is in the operating budget. They can come between the hours of 7:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. or 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. on May 10th and talk informally with department heads to get a better idea. Or if they don't want to ask in a public forum, they can ask informally what's in the budget and what we're looking at. May 16th would be the second council workshop, followed by the public hearing that you will hopefully set at the May 2nd meeting to be held on June 6th, with a targeted date for budget adoption of June 20th. As a reminder, if it is not adopted on June 20th and it remains unadopted by June 30th, the proposed budget, the managers, or in this case, my proposed budget to you is the one that would pass so that we can actually operate.
Could you say that last part again? I didn't follow.
If council does not adopt an amended budget, this or an amended budget before June 30th, the proposed budget that you're seeing tonight is what will be in place until a budget is adopted come July 1.
How many people show up for the public session? I know we get great sweets and stuff in the morning.
That's a very interesting question. Not many.
No, and so I'm wondering, I think one probably would be adequate because, in all the years, I think the one year we used to keep track of it, we
Yep.
actually had 4 people, and that was a record year.
Yes.
So.
It probably still holds the record.
That probably still holds, exactly. So I'm wondering maybe we ought to,
I'm not opposed to changing that. The benefit behind it is self-serving for me. It is one of the criteria for the budget document award that I go for every year, that we have alternative methods for the public to reach out and understand the budget. But it doesn't certainly need to be 2 sessions. It's just
maybe one like 5 to 6.
Sure.
I just, I know. Then
You
someone
have
does.
history
Then
with
someone
it.
doesn't have to buy donuts. So I get stuck with that a couple of times. But.
That's what we meet for, Daryl. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. Any questions for Jessica? I don't want to dive into the weeds, but since it keeps coming up tonight, I'll just talk about that $40,000 piece that keeps coming up for downtown stuff. So if it's what I think it is, Jessica and I have had a bunch of discussion around it. And when we presented, I want to say in February, about the downtown vision update, one of the recommendations that Russ had given us was to not always wait a year to do everything. So if there's little stuff that you need to do mid-year, it'd be good to have a pocket of funds from which you can allocate money to do that. So if it's a piece of public art or a mural or a sidewalk test, or if you remember these early action projects that we did, it might be a few $1,000s here and there. So we didn't have a mechanism to fund that stuff throughout the year. So that was the recommendation, and that's what that money is for. So it would be something like a project would get proposed to the downtown group. The steering committee would make some recommendations, bring it to council, and say, of the $40,000, we'd like to use $5,000 for whatever, temporary platform here. And then we'd get to make the decision, if we leave that $40,000 in. But that's what that's about. So just wanted to explain it.
But you're proposing it go forward again at a $40,000 level for the next year?
We don't have it today. So this is a new fund that we don't have, so we're saying let's establish one.
Nobody's applied for
Starting
it.
July. We haven't asked for any applications, but no, we've had people come to us throughout the year saying, can I do this, can I do that? And we're like, well, we have to kind of see if there's money to do it.
So kind of to give some history with it, 2 years ago, the farmer's market came
Right.
and asked for a couple $1,000s. That would be, an appropriate use of this type of appropriation. And as well as, I believe through the downtown visioning discussion, there was asked to appropriate money for transportation study, for sewer grant match, and the platform at Memorial Park, right? All of those are being asked to be funded out of FY23 with no appropriation. This would kind of give some flexibility for that.
And not to continue a conversation that's over, I won't.
Yeah. Yeah, John.
On the items that you listed, Jessica, that are not in the budget,
Yes.
I believe that Tri-Town Little League is a capital item. I think that's a request for materials, and the Tri-Town Little League is going to provide all the labor and all of the design, and they're just asking for the town to buy materials.
Yes.
I don't want to upset even further by adding to the capital budget, but I'm wondering why it would be in an operating item. Is that so that we can get to it quicker or something? Or?
No, it's primarily based on the fact that when the request was received and where we were at kind of in the process. And I felt that given the nature of the outside agency requests and we seem to be in this transition between what used to be human services, which is really more along the lines of like the Elders Association and Oasis, and there used to be through these, well, not used to be, there still is Through These Doors. So it was more service-based agency requests, right? The things that the town may have to pick up if these agencies didn't exist, right? And it is kind of shifting to this outside use. So we have, like Historical Society dues, the Meeting House Arts, the Grange Hall. So it's expanding to basically all these nonprofits asking, you're giving to these agencies, why I should ask if I should get something. And it felt to be along that scope of ask. I won't say that you're not wrong. I mean, if council wanted to incorporate it into the capital plan at the point of appropriation, that's at your discretion. If you I'm trying to think. So you haven't received the materials yet. I was trying to think of where I was at in the process. But if you look at their ask, which you'll get before the next meeting, they similar to what came before you with the scholarships, right? The school came and asked if the town would fund for scholarships. And it was asked, well, have you asked Durham and Pownell? And the response was not yet, or no. This is the same case with this request. They're only asking the town of Freeport. So I felt like it needed to be
It's a capital improvement for a facility that the town owns. It happens to be that the league, for a part of the year, includes children from other two towns, but other groups use that, and it is absolutely an improvement of a town-owned facility. So I think there's a little bit of difference there about whether or not it's something that all three towns would support. I guess I'm particularly interested in taking a look at that closer because a compelling argument that I heard at the Hunter Road Fields Committee was that the current dugouts don't provide much safety if there's a flash lightning storm, and that's a wide open field over there.
right.
And the proposed dugout design would. And so for $26,000, I'd hate to somebody say, gee, why didn't we protect those kids?
Sure.
So that's, I guess I'm seeing that, well, we all have our favorite little things, I guess, that we can say it deserves different consideration. But I guess in particular, I would say that's a capital improvement on a town facility that gets used a lot.
Sure. I guess it's the way it came across my desk as the request, the way the memo was, it fell within that outside agency request for me. But yeah, if council wants it transitioned over to, somewhere within the capital, that can easily be done.
So next week, we have a shorter agenda, and one of the items on the agenda is budget workshop. So it'd be a good time to kind of.
Let's talk then.
Yeah. Talk then. Yeah. But does anybody have questions tonight while we were just here? Awesome.
Again, a fabulous document. I don't know if you use a template year after year, but to think about all of the work that you put into this, to have us come up here and chew it apart. Anyway, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You'll have more papers for next week, so.
I will say too, reading newspaper articles about other towns nearby, inflation and COLA, and all, I was really nervous about what we were going to see tonight for a tax impact, and I think kudos to you and everybody else for keeping it reasonable to start. So.
Well, thank you, because I was really nervous bringing forth what I did.
It's still there's still things I'd like to change.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, but
it's a better starting point than I thought we'd have.
Yeah. Well, my process started at over 30% increase for municipal, so yeah, it took a few weeks of whittling down, and it's why I compiled this list, because I preliminarily took some hard cuts that I want council to know, and if you, much like John just brought up, if that's something you want in, it should go in. So.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next Tuesday.
Absolutely.
With that, why don't we make our motion to enter executive session, and then I'll say we should use the first 5 minutes of our executive session to take a break. And cable can do what they need to do. So with that, we have a real estate matter to deal with tonight, specifically pertaining to MRSA Section 4056C. So I move that the council enter executive session.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. All in favor?
Aye.
That's everybody. All right, so we're in executive session. 9:30.
And you guys have a whole bunch of stuff to sign, so if you get back
Okay.
early from break, I'll put it over on the table.
Okay.